What an absolutely fabulous energy in the room. I think you'll agree. Good morning. We are delighted to have you here at the Gordon today. I trust you slept well. How many went to yoga this morning? 1, 2. Okay. I also trust you're brimming with enthusiasm for what's on offer in today's program. Can I see a show of hands for that? That's it. All right, before we get things underway, I would like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people as the traditional owners of the land we gather on today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging who have taught their children and adults on this land. And I extend a welcome to all First Nations people with us here today. Just to reiterate some of the housekeeping, presentations, panel discussions, demonstrations will take place across our Culinary collective spaces, and we've got our students and staff in high vis to guide you wherever you need to go. The social cafe will be operating all day for your caffeine needs. Lunch will be served just inside the unit kitchens, which is next to the cafe. That's at 12:30. We have some damper being made on our cauldron outside in the courtyard. That should be available to try at lunch as well. There's a great stall set up of books and Indigenous ingredients. Some of the staff have been out foraging around the coastal areas for those ingredients for you to try as well. Now, to get things underway, it's my great pleasure to introduce Matthew Evans. I'm sure you're all eagerly anticipating to hear from Matthew. Matthew is a Tasmanian food writer, broadcaster and chef who lives and works on Fat Pig Farm, a soil-to-stomach regenerative farm. Matthew is the author of over a dozen books on food, including the On Eating Meat and The Real Food Companion. His book, Soil, is a hymn to the remarkable and underappreciated bit of earth that gifts us life. Matthew's writing provides great depth while making complex topics relatable and easy to access. He's humble, engaging and smart, and we're looking forward to hearing him speak this morning. So, to give you as much time as possible, over to you, Matthew. Please feel welcome.
I think I've got to flick a switch, hang on. So here we go. Oh, great. Thanks for having me today, everybody. I've heard about GrAiNZ a few years ago and always wanted to come, and so it's such a privilege not only to come but to be asked to speak, which is a little bit of a shock. And they've asked me to speak about soil, and I guess because that's what I'm interested in, and it maybe relates to what you're interested in. Well, hopefully it does, and if it doesn't now, hopefully it will by the end. Some of the stuff I'm going to cover a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. If you want to know more, come and grab me during the day about any particular topic. If you know, a lot of you may have covered a fair bit of this, but hopefully, even if you've already heard it before, it might galvanise you a little bit more, ready for the next couple of days of demonstrations and talks. So I live on a little farm in southern Tasmania, Fat Pig Farm. It's 70 acres. We call it our big farm. I just met a woman whose husband built the house on our first farm. That was our small farm, 22 acres. We sold it a few years ago. So we call this our big farm, 70 acres. So in Tasmania, where I live, that's big. It's a long rectangle. There's an entry road here. The only road originally was to this big shed. There was only one shed on the farm of any substance. It's actually 39% is for wildlife, so through the middle and the top bits of bush. We've got a market garden down here where we did grow wheat once upon a time. 4 15-metre long garden beds, 80 centimetre wide garden beds, and I think I made 4 loaves of bread. This is our house. It's about halfway up. So we have a market garden, we have pigs, we have a little bit of heritage orchard. We grow about 50 varieties of apple. It all used to be apple growing country in that little part of Tasmania. We have we have a little restaurant on the farm. This is our restaurant, and so for those in the room who are bakers, we have an Allen Scott oven, a 22-loaf Allen Scott oven, built by Dennis. Oh, his brains, we call it the Dennis, after Dennis, the bricklayer who built it. I can't remember his last name at the moment, but someone will yell it out. So anyway, I won't talk much about us. I want to talk about other stuff. Soil. Soil only matters if you like to sleep indoors, eat and clothe yourself. Okay, so it's kind of important. This is soil. Pretty boring to look at. I give talks on soil all the time, and a journalist I was chatting to one day said to me, "Matthew, you're trying to make soil sexy." And let me tell you, soil's as sexy as colon cancer. And I haven't had colon cancer yet, and I'm hoping not to. And I don't know, I doubt it's a great thing to have, but I also know that soil has things to recommend it, and I doubt colon cancer has much to recommend it. Anyway, this is a rainforest, so it's much easier to get people interested in rainforests because they're pretty, they're great to walk in. You get those beautiful smells when you walk through. It gives you visceral pleasure. This is the Great Barrier Reef. If you get a chance to dive over the Great Barrier Reef, what's left of it, okay, it'll give you visceral pleasure. You'll have a reason to want to protect it. But soil's not quite like that. The best we can do with soil is make a love heart out of it. Oh, I love soil. Right, it's pretty boring to look at. Doesn't give us great joy unless you're a soil nerd. There might be a few in the room, but most of us are a bit more normal than that. The reason I got interested in soil is because of this. I'm always hungry, okay? And so there's no food without soil. 99% of the calories that humans eat come from the fact we've got topsoil and that it occasionally rains. That's the difference between humanity existing and not existing, is that little magic bit, the dark bit, when you cut into soil, when you cut into the ground, the topsoil's the dark bit. The fact that exists and it rains is the difference between humanity being here and not. All life on Earth, pretty much. When we grow food and we think of soil, we think of the Malakati. The Malakati have been feeding themselves on our patch of land for about 42,000 years, probably longer by current estimates, it's 42,000 years. So we tried to take a longer-term view of soil. I was working with a market gardener a couple of years ago, Nadia Dante, who was our market gardener for a few years, and she told me, growing food, mate, growing food's not rocket science. So 15 years ago, I'd never grown much more than a bunch of parsley and a couple of tomatoes. And then we decided to buy our little first farm in southern Tasmania. And she, this woman who came to do our market gardening, she said, growing food's not rocket science, Matthew. It really isn't. It's way more complex than that. It's really complex. Don't be an idiot. So that love heart of soil, so what did it contain? It contained some rock minerals, but then it contained all of this life. So when we talk about healthy soil, healthy by definition means alive, like super duper alive. So take a teaspoon of soil, like the amount that fits in the end of my thumb, there can be more living things than there are humans on the planet. 1 teaspoon of soil, 10 billion living things. And those things are important, and we'll get to why they're important a bit later. But these are the sort of things you can find in a couple of handfuls of soil. 5,000 insects, protozoa, nematodes, microscopic worm-like creatures. I had never heard of them 10 years ago, right? A nematode, didn't even know what it was. Nematodes are the most abundant multicellular organism on the planet. There are more nematodes on Earth than pretty much anything else, apart from bacteria, viruses, okay? Nematodes, if you link, for each of us, there's 60 billion of them. If you made a conga line of nematodes, so if you link them all together, that line of nematodes, they would stretch out past the edge of the atmosphere, out past the edge of the solar system, out all the way to Alpha Centauri, 4 light years away, right? 4 light years away and back. That's how many nematodes there are on Earth. 90% of them live in soil, right? And they have a role. They have a role in soil. And we'll see a little bit in a moment one of those roles. So you've got the nematodes. Bacteria, they're pretty important. Single-celled organisms. There's lots and lots of them. But this one's pretty important. So in a couple of handfuls of soil, you can have 100 kilometres of fungal filaments, fungal hyphae. And they're really important. Fungal hyphae can do stuff that we're only just beginning to understand in terms of science. So there's a lot going on in soil. These are fungal hyphae. So when you think of a fungus, think of a mushroom, but actually most of the fungus 90% of the fungus on Earth live in soil, and they exist as fine threads. Now these threads, they're about 1/60th the width of a root hair, of a plant root hair. And these are all some different styles of fungal filaments. These are little sticky nodes. This is a little 3-cell loop. There's a join, there's a join, there's a join. This is like a lasso. This is going to sound a bit crazy, but fungi can lasso nematodes. So the microscopic worms, nematodes that exist everywhere, they can move through soil, right? A plant's roots can only move through soil really slowly. Fungi can move through much faster. Nematodes and worms can move through soil really fast. And they're moving nutrients around. Now, say you're a plant and you need nitrogen, right? And this is going to sound crazy, but you're welcome to look this up. Plants can talk to each other and they can talk to the underground ecosystem. So if you're a plant and you say, I want some nitrogen, say, nitrogen's a superfood for a plant. If you're a plant and you need some nitrogen, you can actually talk to the fungi that are around your roots and say, can you go and find me some nitrogen? And the fungi will say, maybe. How will I find nitrogen? This is, sorry. I've never used these much before. This is that 3-cell lasso on a fungi. This is the fungal hyphae. This is the fine thread of fungi. This is strangling a nematode. This is a fungi who's been asked to find some nitrogen, or maybe it needs nitrogen for its own purposes, but it's probably getting it for a plant. It's strangling a nematode, because a nematode like us has nitrogen in it, protein in it. It's going to strangle the nematode, it's going to suck the nitrogen out and pass it back along this hyphae to the plant roots, right? This is an electron microscope picture of that happening. So when we talk about life under soil, it's actually, it's not just some kind of fairy tale and, oh, it's really nice that it's there. It's actually got a purpose. These are all different sort of things that happen. There's the 3-cell bit. Here's nematodes being attacked. Here's a nematode. There's sticky ends to some of the fungi, and this is a nematode that's actually escaping. They've managed to get 3 photographs as the nematode manages to wriggle away from the fungi in those last 3. There's other things in soil, and some of them aren't microscopic. And I love these because hopefully we've got a guy coming to our farm later in the year who takes photos of this stuff. So an American guy worked out in a single footfall under one of his boots in an Oregon forest, there can be 16,000 critters that have jointed legs. So when we talk life in soil and bacteria, single-celled organisms, a bit boring, microscopic worms, and you can't see them, these are actually things on jointed legs. So insect-like creatures that look like that. That's a springtail on a snail egg. That's a snail egg. And there are these macro photographers who take photos of all this stuff. One of them's a guy named Andy Murray, and he's not a tennis player. And that's his source, that's his website. There are others, Frank Ashwood, who hopefully will come to our farm later in the year. So how do we connect non-growers to soil? It can be hard. I like to tell stories. And one of the things you can do is tell stories about food. So if you're a grower of grains or anything really, you can tell stories of your soil to get people interested. And if you're a producer, a baker, you can tell stories of the people who grow. But I'm going to tell you a couple of other little stories before we get into a little bit more nitty-gritty of why we should care about soil. One of the reasons people should care about soil is that over half the antibiotics used in human medicine were born in soil. Okay, that's where we found them. We actually know, I was giving a talk a couple of years ago online. Remember those days? Jesus, I'm glad you're all here. This is so nice. Do it in person. And at the end of this talk on soil, some Queenslanders came on and they said, oh, Matthew, can you tell me about anywhere in the world that you've heard of a certain population who are more resistant to certain diseases based on soil? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just like crazy left of field question. And I said, oh, no, but why? And they said, well, because we are researching the next generation of antibiotics. We know they exist in soil. We just haven't found them yet. And you can actually mail your soil sample to these people in Queensland and they will analyse it to see if they could find the next generation of antibiotics. Because 98% of what lives in soil is unidentified by science. 98% is a mystery, a complete and utter mystery. Soil is an antidepressant. There are things, there's a bacterium in soil, when you inhale it, it actually has an antidepressant effect on your brain. It releases happy hormones in your brain. Like this is going to sound airy-fairy. I'm happy to go through any of this later and give you references for any of it, but that's one of the reasons why you never meet a grumpy gardener. There's this chemical in soil, it's so powerful, they're testing it as a treatment for PTSD. right? That's how powerful it is. Soil inoculates our immune system. So I was doing some work with a charity called Mother's Babies. Mother's Babies are trying to give newborn babies the best chance at a healthy life through immunity, right? And the three big ticket items are full-term natural birth, if possible. Not always possible. Breastfeeding for as long as possible, if possible. Not always possible. The third big ticket item is contact with soil in the first 3 months of life, right? It's almost like we've designed, like we evolved to be around healthy soil, right? You know, it's hard to believe, isn't it, that would actually inoculate our immune system. So there are things that live inside us, things like Bacillus subtilis, that exist in soil in almost the same level as they exist in our gut. There are things that were born in soil that actually help inoculate our gut and give us our microbiome, our immune system. Soil affects the climate. So we like to think of, you know, when you're flying somewhere and you tick a box that says, you know, offset my carbon emissions, someone's going to plant a tree, maybe. I don't know if you saw that map that came out last year where they're planting all the trees, tends to be where trees don't grow. But anyway, the theory is someone plants a tree for you to offset your carbon emissions. So how does soil affect the climate? Well, actually, trees, yeah, they're kind of important, but soil holds about 4.5 to 6 times more carbon than all the plants and all the animals on Earth put together, right? Forests matter because what trees are doing is taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting some in their structure, but they're actually putting heaps and heaps into soil. It's actually soil that does the heavy lifting. So soil can affect climate. Soil also affects weather. And this one I love. So when I was getting interested in soil and I was, you know, I started researching, you know, trying to grow, how to grow food better on our farm. I discovered this guy in America, David Sands, and I love this kind of science. So David Sands, he was researching wheat. Some of you might have heard of that, right? It's a grain. They grow it in America, apparently. He was researching wheat blight in the 1980s, I think it was. So 1980s, wheat blight spreads through the, is caused by a bacterium that gets on the leaves of the wheat, and as the temperature drops, this bacterium could, ice crystals, frost would form at a warmer temperature than normal. The ice crystals would form around this bacterium and weaken the plant's cell structure, and the bacterium could then invade the plant, right? So this guy wants to grow wheat without wheat blight. So what he does is he gets an entire paddock in Montana, and he tests the soil, can't find the bacterium there, tests the wheat, it's free of the bacterium there, and then he also tests the water, and there's no bacterium there. Great. He's going to grow a paddock full of wheat, no bacterium, no wheat blight from that bacterium. Plants the wheat, no problem. Then all of a sudden, at a certain point, he discovers wheat blight. But it doesn't start on one end of the paddock and then gradually spread. It happens to the entire paddock all at once. And he's like, oh my God, like where could that come from? And he thinks, well, it has to come from above. Has it blown in or what's happened? And he has this idea that maybe if ice crystals form at ground level at a warmer temperature around a bacterium, can that happen up in the atmosphere, higher atmosphere, where clouds form? And he's like, well, because at that stage, people didn't think that bacteria could fly into the atmosphere, and diatoms and all sorts of stuff, and viruses can fly from the atmosphere. At that point, they didn't know that could happen. Anyway, he goes, I love this kind of science because it's crazy. He's going, well, maybe it's, you know, maybe this bacterium is the genesis of rain. Maybe, because to have rain, you need ice crystals to form in clouds for rain to form, right? So what he does, he goes up in an aeroplane, shoves his hand out the window, right? Gets frostbite, 3 kilometres up in the air, clutching an agar plate, scooping. I don't think he's flying the plane at the same time. He's not. It's like madness, right? Comes back down to Earth, takes the agar plate, the petri dish, incubates it, and finds that bacterium, the bacterium actually has, he finds it in the clouds. This single bacterium that he was looking for. There it is in the clouds. And so he goes, well, probably there's this thing called bioprecipitation where we know that ice crystals can form in clouds around inorganic things, dust particles, but it happens at a lot warmer temperature around organic particles. So maybe things on Earth form the genesis of rain. And the entire world went, what? What? They did nothing. They didn't believe him for about 25 years, I think it was. It wasn't until Montana State University, same university where David Sands went, they had a massive hailstorm. The technology had moved on. They actually had this hailstorm. One of the other researchers took a whole bunch of hailstones that landed on the campus and then cut them in half and found in the centre of every single hailstone the same bacterium that David Sands had found. And it was suddenly like, oh my God, things, biologically active soil and biologically active plants, so forests, have a reason to affect rainfall. So soil affects climate. Affects weather. I already told you that 98% of all the calories we consume come from the fact we have topsoil, but we're losing topsoil pretty fast, 30 to 40 times faster than it's being made. Okay? If you plough the land where you grow your grains, these are global averages. It varies a lot depending on where you are and who you are and how it's done. But if you plough the soil, you generally lose, on average, your topsoil 100 times faster than nature can make it. Nature's always making topsoil, weathering rock and organic matter. But plough the soil, on average, 100 times faster losing it than gaining it, right? I'm no maths genius. No, those numbers don't add up. If you do no plough, no till, you can still lose it on average about 15, 20 times faster than nature makes it. So it's still a losing game, generally, around the world. I want to play a little game. I was on Twitter. I'm so young and groovy. I'm on, with Elon. Twitter, I discovered it a few years ago, and when I discovered Twitter, I discovered that these people, was a big drought on the mainland, and a whole bunch of farmers were comparing their farms to some photographs that had just been released, the first high-res photographs of Mars. The Mars rover was taking really high-res photos. So I want to play a little game. Is it Menindee or is it Mars? Menindee or Mars? Mars. Menindee. What's that one? Yeah, that one is Mars. What about that one? Menindee? No, it's Mars. That's Menindee. Now, this one, see the grass? I know it's a bit hard to see from there. There's a little bit of grass there. They haven't quite got grass on Mars yet, because even in Menindee, they've got soil. Mars does not have soil. Okay, no matter what you read, Mars, the moon, do not have soil, cannot have soil, because soil needs soil life. There is no life on Mars. There is no life, or certainly not the amount of life that we would find in what we would call soil. Rightio, this is also from that time. As the dust storm settles, grazers need to remember that the next drought is inevitable. New South Wales in that same year, 2020, might have been 19, I can't remember when the drought was kicking, right? 8,000 hours of dust storms, 330 days equivalent of dust storms. It's inevitable, according to someone. 650 tonnes moved from these sheep yards. I always wonder what topsoil looks like. I found this photo, it looks pretty interesting. That's just soil being moved around. When soil moves, it's dead, okay? So as soon as you move it around, you blow it or wash it away, it's dead. Annually, Australia loses 2.9 billion tonnes of topsoil every year, right? Every year we lose that much. So you put that into railway carts. This is an iron ore cart or something. But imagine all the topsoil Australia loses every year. I've been trying to find the amount we lost through the floods last year, which would be big, way bigger than this. But anyway, if you put that into railway carts, that train full of Australia's topsoil would stretch around the world. This is just 1 year's worth of topsoil. It would stretch around the world 15 times. Right? How you grow food matters. This is the latest State of the Environment report, the assessment from 2021. So this is the one that the coalition government didn't want to release, and as soon as the Labor government got in, it got released, but it was about a year late, I think. This is the assessment for soil health in intensive land use zones. So this is cropping areas. This is where you grow your grains, where you grow your vegetables, arable land. We're not talking grazing land. This is your arable land where your grains come from. We're poor, and that arrow means getting worse. They don't have worse than very poor. So I don't know where we're going, but I do. Because on average, around the world, we lose 9 kilograms of topsoil for every breakfast, for every lunch, for every dinner that every human on Earth eats. That's how much we lose, a bucket full of topsoil. Imagine that when you have your cornflakes tomorrow. In WA, salinity's ruined about 1 million hectares of growing land. There's about 10 million hectares of land that they reckon in Australia is going to lose its A horizon, essentially its fertility. It's going to cease to be fertile in the next 500 years. It's a lot of land. So the choice is ours, you know. So there's reasons to hope. I want to tell a bit of a personal journey. This is me, our old farm. So just to the right of that photo is a house that a bloke named Dominic built, beautiful little farmhouse that I lived in. I put my pigs down here. There's now a dam there, funnily enough. But it rained 80 millimetres overnight and my pigs destroyed that area. I'm not proud of it, but I'm showing you that photo because this is what humans have done forever. Use a piece of land, grow something on it, bugger it up. You know what we did with that farm? Sold it and moved on. So the world has abandoned about 40% of the land they once farmed since agriculture began. Most of that in the last 200 years. What we tried to do, and we're no experts, we're just having a crack. This is our farm, April 2016. So you can see there's a bit of bare earth in our pig paddocks. These are pig paddocks here. This is a garden. This is very patchy here. I took this shot in April 21, and you can see there's no bare earth in the pig paddocks. Much longer grass. I don't know if you can see that, but it's much greener. And then I realised that was actually a wetter year. So I went back and took a photo in 22. That was the hottest, driest summer on record. And so we've actually changed that quite a lot. You can still see decent grass growth, not much change in here, a little bit of change in here. But yeah, quite decent sort of growth over the 6 years. So it's possible to heal soil because grass is green living plants are a representative of soil health. My job on our farm is to watch grass grow. That's actually what I do for a living. What our aim is on our farm is we don't use soil to grow plants and animals. We use plants and animals to grow soil. That is our intention with our farm, which is not possible for everybody, but it's what we do. This is our garden over 10 years. So it was just a paddock and now it's quite fertile. For those who are in the game, our organic matter went up from about 4% to about 13%. Was the latest measurements from the garden. So that's just a back shot of the garden. I just wanted to show you a picture of the fractals. Just love that. This is pretty important. These are the bigger things we can see in soil. This is compost. And so it's on small scale, in the garden, we can use things like compost. It's much bigger on broad areas. And you're going to hear from some people who know more about this stuff than me. These are our pig paddocks, 2012 to 2014. So you can see there's a bit of bare earth here. This is actually where our garden's going to be. And you can see I put in a shed and there's some garden beds, but it's a bit hard to see. But there's these rows here that are starting to appear. And what we didn't know is where we put our pigs is actually an old orchard. So over time, by saying, oh, let's have no bare earth, let's move our pigs around, let's look after the soil, we've started to see big changes. So this is the same fence here as there. There's no bare earth, and see all these trees. So now for every kilogram of pork we produce, we sequester, we take out of the atmosphere 77 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Part of that's stored in the trees and part of that is stored in soil. So we're not saints, I wanted to show you that. So this is a very recent photo. This is just between two of our dams. This is erosion. So we're trying to look after topsoil, but I sometimes look at our farm and go, we're not losing, how many kilos are we losing for every breakfast, for every lunch, for every dinner? Well, we're still losing topsoil because, this is the topsoil here and then we are now eroding down and that's widening out. And I haven't managed to come up with a solution. It's quite a big drop between one dam and another and we end up with this massive erosion. So we're no saints. On 70 acres, we grow enough food to feed for 10,000 meals a year. So when I say a meal, we're a mixed farm because we have the market garden. We do 30 to 50 species of annual vegetables. We do about 30 species of perennials. So it's quite a mixed diet. We milk cows, we have pigs, we have goats and we have beef cattle. We're carbon negative, meaning we sequester over 100 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year, probably close, somewhere between 100 and 150 tonnes a year. And part of that's through soil and part of it's not. This is our grazing land. So you can see this is an abandoned vineyard up here. But you can see the start of some other stuff. We've done some, we planted a cover crop through the middle of our pasture just to see what happened. And this is what it looked like when I grazed it. That's the first of 3 grazing. You can see the tick beans. There's also some mustard in there. It was a 9-species mix. Probably should have done a few more. Couldn't get any tillage radish, daikon at the time. That's the first of 3 grazings. This here, so you might have heard of plants that store nitrogen. This is a broadbean, tick bean. This is the roots. So wherever you've got lots of stuff clumped around the roots, that's a really good sign, because the soil ecosystem will clump around the roots much more with healthy soil. These little baubles, when you hear of a legume, a pea or a bean storing nitrogen, they don't actually store the nitrogen. It's bacteria. It's the ecosystem around the roots of the plant that does the storing of the nitrogen. So these are full of rhizobium bacteria. Right? They are, and what they do is they use energy that the plant has got from the sun to take nitrogen out of the air, and that's essentially nitrogen superfood for plants. That's a beautiful form of it that will stay in the soil once the broadbean has been nibbled by my cows. They go pink. That's a form of, you know how our blood goes red with haemoglobin? This is a form, it's called leg haemoglobin. Okay, so it's a leguminous haemoglobin. So it goes pink because when there's stored enough nitrogen, there's also oxygen that's fixed in there. And leg haemoglobin is what they're using, I think, in the Impossible Burger to make it bleed. Right, I want to just really talk about briefly about photosynthesis. So, when I was at school, photosynthesis. So a plant, I was taught that what a plant does is it uses the sun's energy, takes in the sun's energy, and then it breathes in carbon dioxide and it breathes out oxygen. And that's really handy for us because we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. So plants help us to breathe, right? That was what I was taught. And that's kind of true, and it's kind of not, and it's kind of irrelevant because it's not actually the oxygen-carbon pathway in that sense that is important in terms of photosynthesis. So all green living plants, what they're doing, every green leaf, every time you see a green leaf on a, it can be grasses, it can be wheat, it can be a tree, a chloroplast is like the original solar panel. They take in the sun's energy, a photon of the sun's energy hits that chloroplast, and they use that energy, yes, to draw in carbon dioxide, and they take up water from their roots, and they do breathe out oxygen. But the important thing that happens is the plant takes in carbon dioxide, takes in water, uses the sun's energy, splits those apart and recombines them as carbohydrate. A plant makes sugar out of thin air, out of that. When you eat a carrot, 99-point-something% of that carrot used to be fresh air and water, right? That's the miracle. Yes, there's some other things in there, some calcium, some magnesium, some nitrogen, whatever, but the vast majority is sugars that a plant makes out of thin air. Now, that's nothing else on Earth can do that apart from algae in the ocean, right? So you and I, there's a couple of very small caveats to that, but essentially that's where energy gets converted into digestible form. So you and I, well, take me as an example. I'm of Scottish and Welsh ancestry, right? I am a very pale person, right? If I go and lie out in the sun and I attract all the sun's photons, all I do is get sunburned and then get a melanoma, right? That's as good as it's going to get. A plant turns the sun's energy into sugar, energy in digestible form. It's utterly amazing. That's the start of energy on Earth in a digestible form for us. And remember, the oceans only produce about 1–2% of the world's calories. So they loom big in our imagination, but they're not producing much. And in fact, most of our oceans would become less fertile if we didn't have topsoil, because most of our fisheries rely on fertility and nutrients that are washed off land. Anyway, what this plant is doing, as all plants do, is it's turning carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrate. It's using, say, let's do some global averages, 70% of its energy it's using to build itself, to fight disease, to fight stress if there's wind or whatever. And it's building its structure. 30% of what the plant produces, of the sugars it produces, it is dribbling out through the ends of its roots. Because 10 billion living things in a teaspoon of healthy soil cannot make their own food. Just like us, they need energy in digestible form. So the plant is actually dribbling out mostly sugars, but sometimes amino acids and even fatty substances. The plant actually dribbles out things called exudates from its roots to feed the underground ecosystem. So that fungi I showed you before that was strangling a nematode and passing the nitrogen back to the plant, the fungi's not doing that because it's a nice guy. The fungi's doing that because the fungi can't produce sugar. The fungi needs sugar from somewhere. So the plant, the way it works is this underground economy. The plant says, I need nitrogen. Can you go get me some nitrogen? The fungi says, what's in it for me? And the plant says, well, guess what? You need sugar. I've got sugar. How much do you need? And that's the transfer. So it's a two-way street. The rhizosphere is the area around the plant roots where most of this action happens. It's the healthiest soil. It's the most biologically active soil. There could be 100,000 different root exudates from plants, so different biochemicals that are dribbled out through the roots of the plant, and up to 150 biochemicals in food, which are micronutrients. So if the plant makes something to dribble out through its roots, that chemical exists in the plant structure itself. But it's not a one-way street. There are things that are made in soil that are passed back to plants that become part of the nutrients of food. Finally we'll get on to some GrAiNZ, geez. These are just some big numbers for you to think about. Between 1961 and 2013, the area of land planted to wheat, rice and maize increased from 66 to 79%. Doesn't sound like a huge increase. And we grew less barley, millet, oats and rye and sorghum. So essentially, we dropped the nutrient content of our grain load. Just simply on, we're not talking organic, we're not talking healthy soil, we're not talking anything else except growing different species, not even different varieties, just different species. Sorry, I'll just go back to that. This is the sort of decline that we're seeing, the nutrient decline. So that's the sort of problem we've got with if we only grow certain grains and not a lot of grains or a variety of grains. We actually affect the amount of nutrients available to humanity. Between 61 and 2011, the protein, iron and zinc contents in the global cereal supply declined by 4%, 19% and 5% respectively. Okay, so that's just looking at the cereal supply as a whole. Again, we're not talking about organics, we're not talking about healthy soil, we're not talking about regenerative agriculture, we're just talking about what was available. So I want you to imagine this. If the roots of wheat in a 1 hectare field, right, organically, pretty healthy, right, the roots can stretch 46,000 kilometres in length. That's a lot of root mass in a 1 hectare field, right? That's a crazy amount. So it's greater than the circumference of the Earth. So if you linked all the roots together of a 1 acre of wheat, that's how far they can spread. And we're talking healthy wheat, healthy soil. But the fine fungal threads, the hyphae, they can stretch over 2,000 times as far. Now you've got to remember, if you've got some phosphorus or calcium or magnesium, whatever, boron, selenium, if it's 2 millimetres away from the end of the plant root and you have no soil life, the plant cannot access it. But the fungi can access it. I like this one, 2017 study from India. So we're looking at, I'm interested in soil life and biology. So they got 3 different bacteria from the rhizosphere of plants, then bred them up and poured them on the roots of wheat. They just added 3 species. Now, we're talking in 2 handfuls of soil, 10,000 species. They found 3, right? We're not talking complexity. We're taking a very simplistic view of it. But look, they increased the level of nitrogen, phosphorus, copper, zinc, magnesium and iron. Adding only 3 out of 10,000 species, they increase the plant height and yield. So what's possible with biology is utterly amazing. The wheat we eat today is 22 to 39% less nutritious than it was 100 years ago. Now, when I'm talking less nutritious, I'm talking about some pretty big things: iron, copper, sulphur, phosphorus, selenium and zinc. Right? So the way we've bred wheat, that's actually what we've done, is reduce these minerals in wheat. But we're not even looking at micronutrients, phytochemicals, tiny amounts, those 150,000 biochemicals that could exist in your grain. But this is what we do know over a 100-year period, because a lot of these things you couldn't measure phytochemicals and stuff 100 years ago. Dwarfing wheat, often lower in protein, but more importantly, it has 18% less photosynthesis. Now I want you to think about this if you're a grower in the room. So dwarfing wheat, the reason we go dwarfing wheat is because if the wheat gets too big and it's got a really big head, the stem can't hold up the heavy head, because we've bred wheat to go from like 3 seeds per head to 30 or whatever it is over the last 500 years. So you have a lot more seeds in the head. So what we did is said, oh, we need to grow really short varieties. Now, that's fine for humanity, okay? But if you cut down photosynthesis by 18%, you have reduced the food supply to soil, the amount that soil gets to eat, you've cut its food supply by 18%. If you then do a summer fallow, which I know is pretty popular in the big grain industry, so summer fallow, for those not in the industry, fallow means resting. Summer fallow, from the grain growers I've talked to, what they do over summer, they don't want to waste any water, so they don't want any plants actually growing in the ground over summer. They spray it with Roundup or some kind of herbicide, so everything dies, so they're not taking water out of the soil for a few months. But what you're actually doing is starving soil to death, because the foods, you cut off the food at its source. If there is no green living plant, you have no food source building. Things in the soil can eat dead stuff, but only some things eat dead stuff, and they can only do it for a certain amount of time. And the more dead stuff they eat, the lower the carbon becomes, the lower the organic matter becomes. So these are just things to consider. Variety counts. So acid-resistant wheat. So we can grow wheat in areas that we didn't. I'm going to talk wheat because wheat's the one that's most commonly researched. There's lots of more money in wheat than there is in sorghum or triticale or anything. Acid-resistant wheat can mask poor soil quality. So we now know you can grow wheat in pretty much anything. You can grow an acid-resistant one. You can throw artificial nitrogen at it, and you can get it to grow. Okay, but can we do that forever? Probably not. Because what happens, things like this, acid-resistant wheat, hinders the growth of the use of rotational crops. So if you want to plant a cover crop like we did, you're actually going to create a problem for the crops that you want to grow maybe in between. So even if you are trying to look after your soil and grow a cover crop in between to fix nitrogen naturally using legumes, you're going to end up with a problem just by variety. So it's something else worth considering. This is my favourite thing ever. Now, we're in a room, I presume some of you are growers, some of you are millers, some of you are bakers, some of you are doing all of it. I got into food, into growing food because I wanted to eat, right? And I wanted to eat more and I wanted to eat well. And I love this study because now I'm interested in soil, and I'm interested in soil because I want to eat more and I want to eat better, right? And this is the classic example. In 2013, they looked at the flavour of bread, and they wanted to look at a really old variety of wheat, and they wanted to look at a modern variety, and they grew the wheats in virtually identical plots. So they grew the modern variety, they grew the ancient variety, and they grew the modern variety, and they added one fungal strain. So remember, there's hundreds of and thousands of fungi in the world, but they found a particular fungal strain that they thought might be beneficial. And then they gave it to a group of testers. And these people were trained testers. They are trained in being able to analyse the texture and smell and flavour of bread. And they baked bread. And a single fungus gives the wheat more and different micronutrients. So, sorry, if the fungus gave it more or different micronutrients, you'd be able to taste the difference in the bread. Okay, so, because what's happening, the plant is gaining more stuff from soil, essentially. Getting more minerals, more phytochemicals, all that kind of stuff going on. So if the grain is getting more of that, you should be able to taste the difference in the bread. It's a long way from soil to bread, but they could taste the difference. And they had an electronic nose that can pick up chemical differences in smell, and the electronic nose could tell the difference. One single change in a fungal strain that was added to the soil changes the end product, the flavour of the bread. And I love this because it shows the connection between the biology beneath our feet and the flavour of the food we eat. So it's our choice. Grain's one of the big problems is because oftentimes it's grown in greater scale. Generally wheat, which is the great example, generally when we grow wheat we lose carbon in soil. It's much harder to increase soil health growing grains en masse unless you have lots of rotational crops, maybe put animals in the system, it's much harder to look after that soil than it is to look after, say, the grasslands that I look after, or a market garden where they have lots of inputs. But what I'm really excited about talking to you about this today, because actually GrAiNZ is the great frontier, because we know there are people who can do it and are doing it on small and even big scale, but it needs to be spread further, because every time you're looking after soil health, you're looking after the flavour of the bread, but you're also, all those things in bread are, or whatever you're making, pasta, beer, it doesn't matter, all the things that exist that give it flavour are also things that are doing us good. So that connection between soil health, human health, planetary health, for me, is a really clear line. And what connects it all is pleasure, the joy of eating. Because actually, every time we nail that, we get a better tasting product for the person at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Sorry, just going to grab my water.
Incredible. We're so grateful to have you here. Are there any quick questions for Matthew? You've stunned them all.
Are they awake?
No, really? Yes, we've got one.
This is kind of more of a general question, but you're talking about the process of increasing the topsoil in grain production. Is that something we're going to be touching on in the panel discussions on grain growing later on? It'd be really interesting to continue that conversation with the growers.
Do you want to answer? Yeah, Jade will handle that.
Yes, it will be.
Topher.
Yes.
Thank you, Matthew. That was amazing. Right at the end, you sort of looped it all together between the soil and then the end product. When we're talking about like nutrient density or nutrition or even flavor itself, where are we at with, forgive me, I did study science, but where are we at for sort of measuring that? I mean, we have anecdotal experience for the foods that we eat. And you know a tomato from your backyard tastes different from one from the supermarket. But is there something that, or are there methods that are being looked at to sort of track that or test it?
Yeah, so the single best measure we have currently to measure nutrient density, I'm not talking fat, protein and carbohydrate. I'm not even talking vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals are kind of like 1920s science. I'm talking 2023 science. The best tool we have to measure that is the human palate. Because human nose can smell it to a billion different smells, and a smell is an indicator of a chemical that's in fruit, and the chemicals in fruit are those things that are made by the plant to talk to soil or made in soil and passed to the plant. And so that's the finest tuning we've got. There are people coming up with things that you should be able to take in the next couple of years into a supermarket and compare the broccoli in a supermarket compared to your organic grower, and be able to compare nutrient density. That's the holy grail, but we're not quite. It's in a testing phase apparently still, and I don't know how expensive it'll be, but that'll make the difference, because you'll be actually, for growers, it'll be saying, oh, you don't just get paid per kilo, you'll get paid for quality. And the quality isn't just how green it is or how long it lasts; it's nutrient density. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Matthew.
No worries, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We've got... All right, on to our next session. So we have Jade Miles joining us this morning from Sustainable Table. Jade is a farmer and an educator, author and a local food advocate. She's powerfully active in the regenerative space and a great connector of people. As I said, she's joining us from Sustainable Table. She's currently the CEO of Sustainable Table, where she's overseeing fabulous change, big change. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about that and what they're doing with grain. And then she's going to moderate our panel on regenerative farming and food systems with 4 fabulous panellists, Rob Pekin, Stephen Walter, Courtney Young and Topher Baum. So welcome Jade and our panellists.
Thanks. I'm actually really excited about the panel, so I'm going to cut the ST bit maybe a bit short. Can I ask really quickly, who's heard of Sustainable Table? Holy heck, that was not... You know what, uni go through a quick and everyone will not put their hand up. I thought I was going to have to say, well, this is what we are. So maybe I'll do that in a really, really brief form. Thanks, Pip. So I come with filthy fingernails because I'm also a farmer. I come a bit exhausted because I've just got to the end of our berry picking season. And I come sort of exhausted but equally elated by what we're doing at Sustainable Table. So the really formal bit of what we do is that we bring together courageous eaters, growers, leaders, and aligned, and that bit's really key, funders to the same room to have conversation about how we rapidly change our food system to become a regenerative one. And when they asked me to be that, and I love the way I was introduced as currently the CEO, that's a good way to describe me because I change tact pretty regularly. Who knows how long I'll be there, but let's see. For now, it's an amazing group of female thinkers. Pretty small team, but we are national. And we work in 3 different ways. And we don't want to be all things because there are some amazing people doing bloody amazing things in this sector. And I'm only just getting my head really around what's going on in the grain, the emerging grain projects. But what we do isn't everything, but we do storytelling. We have an incredibly small but dynamic team of storytellers. One of them is here today and she's going to be talking to as many of you as possible so that we can shout from the rooftops the brilliant magic that's being created by you guys, whether you're growing it, whether you're milling it, whether you're creating beautiful things to feast on with your hands. We tell stories. We have an industry development team, and again, it's small, but they are bloody mighty, and they're really about understanding from you what the hell's going on. What we don't want to do with our 3rd pillar, which is sprinkle money around, we don't want to sprinkle money ad hoc, and we don't want to sprinkle money in a way that services our needs, because who the hell are we to know what you need, when that doesn't actually meet your needs. So we work really, really closely with industry to understand what the levers are and what the blockages are and what the problems are in what you're seeing every single day and what need to be amplified or tweaked and enabled. So we do those 3 things. I did write myself some notes because I thought I could go absolutely anywhere. We have been on the ground for about 13 years. And really we began as a consumer education organisation based out of Victoria. And at the time that was really necessary. We might have had maybe one of your series, Fat Pig Farmer, on the ground by then, 13 years ago. But we didn't have many people talking to consumers about what their role is, about the fact that they needed to reckon with the reality of the world that we lived in, and the fact that as eaters, we could make a decision 3 times a day or more, if you're a 16-year-old twin, as the case may be in my household, to really impacting the future of the world that we're living in for our children and our grandchildren. And so it was really necessary at the time to have an organisation that would carry some of that load and put content out there that supported people. Because as you know, can I just get a really quick hand actually? Who is a grower? Who is a processor? Righto. Who is a baker? Who's doing all of it? Yeah. Yeah, so you guys wear so many hats that some of those pieces of the pie need to be sort of taken off your plate. So at the time when Sustainable Table was doing the storytelling as a predominant focus, it really had a role. But you jump on Google now and you'll find a million different reasons or ways to become an ethical eater if that's what you think you need to be as a consumer. And so we stopped being as relevant as we were and we needed to really shift gears. And what we were hearing was that there was this need for financial enablement, cash. And so we worked with a really small handful of philanthropic funders who were mostly Victorian-centric, and we identified a particular region, and we worked closely with some government agencies who also co-funded, and it was mainly around the Mornington Peninsula region. And over about a 4-year period, we funded 45 different projects at a very grassroots level. We went to the industry, we heard from them, they told us what they needed, we put money in their back pocket, and we worked out how to join all of those itty-bitty dots into what would essentially become systemic change. And what we saw over just a very short amount of time, with just a very relatively small amount of money, was genuine systemic change. People ask us all the time, how did you measure that? And Matthew sort of talked then about some of the sort of measurement tools. And really, you can put all of these complex scientific hoopla in the way, but the reality is that still the best way to tell things is with the human palate. It's a little bit the same with impact measurement. The best way to understand the impact or the outcome of something is to ask the people that are actually on the ground with their hands in the dirt, living it, breathing it every day. Is this viable? Is it working? Are we seeing change? Are you deeply observing and noticing a difference? You know, if humanity is this long, it's just been this tiny little bit up here that has gone back to science and asked us to give us black and white statistics. The rest of the time we leant into the fact that we are custodial species that use our head and our heart and our hands and tell us what it is that's working or not working. We have ancestral knowledge within all of us. And actually it's that stuff that comes back to one of the hardest things to do, and we were having a conversation just before we started talking this morning. It doesn't matter how much magic we create or what change we're trying to bring, the hardest thing we will do is work out how to interact with each other. Anyone else exhausted by that? Yeah. But it's also the most magical thing that we will do. And so for those of us who are brave enough or courageous enough, as we use that word in our mission statement, to really take that head on, we're trying to find ways to connect those that are creating magic and bringing change. Because it's bloody hard, but we do know how to do it because we did do it once. It was the only thing that meant thrival and survival or not surviving, and that's how to interact with each other. The thing is, Sustainable Table then moved into this sphere about 2.5, 3 years ago, where our role in the whole ecosystem was to bring funding, cash, in all of its various forms, to the table to those who are doing things that are currently being blocked by the current system. But what happened was that we discovered that fundamentally the financial system is based on extraction. That's really tricky when the people we actually need to be working with are the farmers who are building everything around a paradigm of regeneration. Not only are the languages not the same thing, the expectations and the outcomes aren't the same thing. So we didn't have a bridge. So as we were building our team and as we were building our understanding and going from a small localised area in Victoria to become a national organisation, we undertook a piece of research that we call the Regenerative Investment into Food and Farming Research. We do have an amazing comms team, but we didn't get a snappier title than that. We call it the RIF. So I'm talking about the RIF, that's what I'm talking about. And Robert, who's going to jump up here in one of those seats in a minute, will talk a bit more about that on our panel. But what we discovered was that we could build a bridge. We can actually find a way to get investors or philanthropists slowly to understand why we actually need to move away from extraction in our investment system to be able to find a way to support our farmers. So our farmers, I don't know if any of you had a look at the National Farmers Federation stats just recently. These stats are kind of frightening, but one of them was that 33% of our farmers in the last 12 months have considered self-harm or suicide. Fuck. Let's take a deep breath and think about the reality of that for a minute. Like, that is frightening. 75% of these poor buggers, and I'm one of those, don't feel like the food that we're producing is valued and that the work that we're doing on a Sunday and on a public holiday without getting paid extra isn't valued. So why the hell would we continue to do it? But they do, and they do because food, just like Matthew said a minute ago, is foundational. It's absolutely foundational to our very existence. So if we take a step back, and you were all in the room when Matthew just spoke a minute ago, we need to understand the soil. We need to understand what the hell a nematode is. Like we need to be able to not only understand it, but celebrate it through all of the steps of the supply chain. Having worked in food systems now for sort of 10 or 12 years and being a farmer myself, the one area I've had almost nothing to do with is GrAiNZ, interestingly. It's kind of the last horizon in my understanding, and I think in many people's understanding, because often it sits in the supermarket as a 59-cent bag of black and gold flour, and it's not valued. But I reckon I can feel pretty safe that I'm in a room of people who shake their head and say, no bloody way, this is valued, it's foundational, it forms the majority of just about every meal the majority of us eat. So let's actually start talking about it, and let's get excited about it. Let's find a way to fund it, let's find a way to celebrate it and tell the stories of it, and let's find a way to connect all of us who are doing it. It's not some massive commodity monoculture that sits out in Western Australia. It is that too, but it's not just that. And so Sustainable Table is undertaking these projects in a way that make them human, that make them alive, and we bring them to the table in a way that gets those that have got money, lots of it, to get excited about it too. We were talking about this yesterday, and someone said, actually it was Tammy, he said, let's not call it capital. And she's right. You know, it is this really powerful tool, and it sucks that a massive group of people who are doing amazing things can't get access to it, while a very small group of people who aren't doing amazing things but happen to have a lot of it sitting in their bank account are holding it tight. So our role is to sort of crack that and change what that looks like. I haven't actually used my notes. This is always a bit worrying because I could go anywhere. A couple of years ago, when we managed to secure some of this precious philanthropic money, we had about $1.5 million in the bank, and that was just through 3 or 4 existing relationships with funders. And they said to us, you build a team of people who truly understand food systems, and then we'll have the confidence and the trust in you to go and find a heap of projects that need to be funded. So we have this incredible team, of which Robert is one of. Serenity Hill is another one. There's a few, just Tanya Massey is another one. We put the word out and we said, we've got $1 million. If you've got an amazing regen project, tell us about it. We thought we might get 50 or 60 projects. We got nearly 300 projects in just a couple of weeks. Then we had to assess them all. But what it gave us was this beautiful helicopter view of Australia's food ecosystem. We got all of these amazing projects come out of the woodwork that told us that really didn't matter where you were or what sector you're in, we could probably gently nuance you into one of 7 boxes. It told us very clearly that we have these very strong sectors, and one of those was GrAiNZ. There was quite a lot of Indigenous-led GrAiNZ projects that came to our attention, and quite a lot that weren't Indigenous, but regardless, it made us incredibly excited about working with people at all stages of the supply chain, and it made us realise that we actually needed to focus on exactly this, and we needed to find funders who wanted to focus on it as well. At about the same time, we undertook a project, I talked about the RIF, where we researched by speaking to 60 global leaders about projects that they were working on that were working. Because, I don't know, and you guys would be in this position, but you often come up with an idea and you think you'll trial it and you get shot down. I'm a regen apple grower on a plateau that used to have 35 family-owned farmers growing apples on that plateau, and now there are just 2 plus us, kind of 3 plus us. Those other 32 have all packed up, told their kids not to get involved, realised there's no money in it for small-scale family-owned farming, and buggered off and sold their properties to lifestylers because they made a whole lot more money by pushing their trees out. They do often live in the small town near us, and they continue to drive past us with their arms crossed, peering over peering over their steering wheel, those bloody weirdo hippies doing this weird stuff with curly rows and inter-row chaos, and it's a bloody mess. I wish they'd just weed or spray the shit out of their orchard to get it back in order. So yeah, it looks like a bloody mess. But what we discovered when we did the Reef project was that there are examples of success all over the country and all over the world. And if we could just identify some of those and share those really powerful stories, not just with each other so that we're all connected, not just with consumers so that they start to understand, and not just with investors so that they start to come on the journey with us, but with everybody, we could actually be visible. So a few things have come out of this. We've learnt that relationship is all. We kind of know that, right? You know that if a really good friend tells you to go and eat something or go and see a movie, you'll probably listen to them and do it. Well, it's kind of the same in farming and in funding of farming, as it turns out. So relationship is everything, and trust is critical to that. You can only move at the speed of trust, and when you're within a community, even if it's a virtual one or one that is brought together because you all have GrAiNZ hats on, you can only go as deeply and as quickly as the trust will allow and that community will allow. It's told us that if we don't go back to base and start listening to our Indigenous wisdom, with ancestral history that takes us back to 65,000 years, then we actually are building an agricultural system on a foundation that is fraught with potential of collapse sooner than not. We don't have to maintain this arrogance that we have the answers, because we don't necessarily have the answers, and we've seen in a lot of cases that we actually don't. We've got it wrong. It's okay to get it wrong. We've also learnt very strongly that we can't just make decisions, especially, and this is interesting for funders, using our head. We have to use our heart, and we have to be heart-led. And I think, for the most part, the people that get into regen ag understand that only too well, and so they connect. It's sort of like an unspoken language. Someone explained it to me this morning as the difference between sourdough bread and bread that's bought, or a packet mix. It's like, yeah, I kind of get that. That's a really good explanation. I'm definitely sourdough bread. So Sustainable Table is now in this really fortunate position with this piece of research that we've done. We are road showing it across the country, and we are having conversations with funders in every capital city. We've now done 4 of those capital cities, hence the fact I've got no voice, because we've been on the go for some time. The most wealthy of all of those funders joined us at a lunch table in Sydney 2 weeks ago, and he spoke at the beginning, and he talked about, he urged all the other funders in the room to consider the role that they had to enable those that were doing this absolutely noble work. And he's got a slightly pompous English accent, and I was sort of listening but sort of a bit sceptical as he was talking. And at the very end of our presentation, where we talked about the fact that there was a level of fear in all of us for the future and that we had to act really fast, that the IPCC has coined this term, the critical decade, and that we are 4 years into that. So we are rapidly hurtling to a place that many of us won't recognise. So we need to enact change right now. At the end of our presentation, he came up to me, he's quite a big man, and he put his arms around me and he had tears running down his cheeks, and he said, "Shit, it's just occurred to me that I am actually the keeper of a locked box, and I've got to unlock that box. And I've got to enable these people that are doing this work, because these people are actually our bloody heroes, and we need to listen to them and we need to be led by them. I can't assume that I have the knowledge. I thought I did until today, but actually I need to hear what it is you tell us they need." So I want to ask that question in the room right now. Sustainable Table does have an amazing comms team, an industry development team, and access to funds that are hopefully growing as we go. But we want to know from you what it is that you need from us. If we could put funds on the table, would that be enabling? Pop your hand up if that's the case. It's not for everybody. Like, some people are still a bit fearful of actually complexifying, funds. And if we were to put funds into your pocket, would that be for infrastructure? Yeah, there's some very straight hands here. Would it be for marketing?
Yep.
That's significantly more than I thought. Christy, I need your brain to absorb this too. Would it be for education? Still more hands than I thought. Right. Would it be for opportunities to come together and learn from each other? Yep. And do we want to do that in person, or are you happy to do that online? Or both? In person? Definitely the preference. Okay. What about resources? So if we were to put together, if we hear loudly and clearly, there are other amazing organisations doing similar things to this, but, if there are gaps and Sustainable Table has capacity to do it, are you likely to go to the internet and to websites for resources that are specifically for you? Yeah, quite a few nodding heads too. Righto, okay, we're going to be really busy in the next 2 years. Okay. Before I introduce 4 incredible humans, because I think I've probably talked enough, has anybody got any questions? Oh, the map. God, yes. Righto, forgot about that. I've got a big note on that notepad that I haven't looked at once. We did this discovery phase. We flashed all these amazing projects, got this high-level understanding of what the whole ecosystem looked like across the country and went, that is bloody amazing. We are now kings because we're empowered with knowledge. What we actually needed to do was share it with you. But we can't do that very, very easily because there's only one of me travelling the countryside talking with a microphone in my hand. So we've created this map over the last 6 months. It's free to be on the map. What we're really trying to do is enabling you in the way we've been enabled. We want to connect you to each other so that you leapfrog on each other's knowledge and you share openly. We only work with people who will share their knowledge in an open source way. So what we really want to do is make sure that you, if you're starting out, you can find someone else who's doing it and you can pick up the phone and you can connect with them and learn. We really want to share what you're doing with funders, because we want funders to understand, who say to us all the time, I've got $3 million, but I don't know where to put it. And we're like, shit, we can spend that for you. Just ask us. We need them to see you directly without a middleman if that's the easiest way, or with a middleman if they need someone that's trusted in the middle. But we need them to see you. They don't know about you. They don't know where to put their money. We also need consumers to see you, because we need them to understand that, if they've just moved to an area and they want to access ethically grown meat, they know how to do that. And so it's free to join. It takes about 40 minutes, and we've had a bit of pushback on this, but the reality is that, like any other word, regenerative has now been co-opted and it's somewhat greenwashed. We could move to agroecological. We haven't at this point, but there's definitely a fair bit of protection around the use of that word. The reason it takes you 35 or 40 minutes to fill in is because we ask you a whole stack of questions, and we do actually expect that you'll give us fairly solid and truthful, honest answers. We then assess you and you then get access. What we really want to be in a position to do is take a visual of what our ecosystem looks like, all of the projects that all of us are working on, and actually make that visible so that the politicians who are making legislative decisions that do actually have a trickle-down impact on us, whether we think we're outside the box or not, whether, so funders can see that this isn't just sort of some tin pot tinkering in the corner, but it's actually a massive movement and it requires a whole lot more support. And so that consumers can start to see that they're actually not on the train if they're not following this way of thinking and being. It's a whole paradigm shift. That's massive, and we're working on that with different groups as well, but none of us can do this alone. It's just at sustainabletable.org.au. Yes?
What's the name of that service?
It's just called the Regenerative... Thank you. See, I think we're not good at names. I think we need to work on that. Anyway, that's what it's called. It's on the Sustainable Table homepage. You'll find it, and it says join the map, click here. We're really hoping, we're about to do a PR push, and then we're going to start a political advocacy push. We're really hoping to have a very strong visual to take to government in the next few months. So if you have a network that you can push that out to, encourage everyone to be on it so that we can all see each other and we can give visibility to this. Any other questions? Yes?
are you looking at funding to put covenants on agricultural land near suburbia to protect agricultural land?
In peri-urban areas. Yeah, we're definitely sitting on a number of working groups around peri-urban agricultural protection. I think it's inevitable. I think that will be where we go. We tend to fund the unsexy stuff, and that's somewhat unsexy. It is, some would argue, the responsibility of government to be doing exactly that. And whether it's that we're funding a covenant or that we're advocating for covenants to be applied remains to be, and whether we do that or whether we find partners to do that, it definitely is on the radar. Yep. This
is a bit counterintuitive, so I apologise if I get off on the question, but is there an avenue for funding to work on projects to change the model so funding is no longer required?
Yes. Yeah. So philanthropists spend their life saying, and will we have to be paying them again in 12 months' time and 12 months' time and 12 months' time? Sometimes the answer to that is yes, for a very good reason, because we actually need to fund system change, and that's very hard to get funding from a bank for. But yes, the idea is that we would be funding projects that are looking to build enough strategic direction to sort of climb themselves out of the situation. The projects that we tend to fund are the ones that are absolute edge dwellers that will never get funding because they are as innovative as all hell. We need those edge dwellers and we need their bravery and their courageousness because they're actually going to inform the rest of us that are following. And so we need to find those projects that are kind of the lever, so when you push them, they unravel a whole heap of other opportunities that other people can be involved with. So we call them our change lever projects, and sometimes we find them and go, oh, that will have a massive impact. If we can fund the first few stages of that, the flow-on effect is huge. But yes, but you know, there's a few organisations that I don't know how they would ever become self-funded. And so the reality is that someone needs to fund them because they can't burn out. We've got some incredible leaders in this space and they're all bloody knackered. So we actually need to fund it.
What are some examples of those organisations?
Yep, Farmer Incubator is probably a good one of those. Or Young Farmers Connect. They're both two quite good examples and they both look after new farmer pathways, the box that we call new farmer pathways. And they both have capacity to be national. We're not just looking for projects of scale, we're also looking for projects that are replicable. And so it might be that the model works in one place and then it needs to be tweaked fairly significantly to be relevant in another place, but that there is still replication value. So we have funded them for capacity. There is nothing sexy about funding capacity. You get nothing out of it when the acquittal time comes and we have the conversation with us and they say, yeah, we did it. We operated. Great. They haven't fallen over, and this is critical because we've got to support these initiatives. Yep.
Is there data around what percentage of farmers are actually interested in regen agriculture?
All our advisors go, no. Look, anecdotally, when I go to these sorts of things and ask for a show of hands, I can tell you 95% of hands go up. It's very few that leave their arms crossed, and generally that's because they have an implicit distrust of the banking system, and so any investment feels like it comes with strings that are too hard to adhere to. I get that. The baseline debt model is not appealing to any farmer because you hit a bad year and you're buggered. So what we need to do is reframe what a debt-based model can look like for a vibrant agricultural system. It looks like long-term, really, really long-term. It looks like deep relationship in practice, so that if shit hits the fan, you've got the ability to sit around the table with your funders and say, we're 3 years into a drought year, can't do anything about it, sorry, you're not getting any repayments. It looks like humility at the table, where the farmer doesn't have to say, how high do I need to jump in order to maintain the dollars that you've put on the table because you now wear the pants, even though you've got no skills in this game. So it looks like an even power play at the table. I mean, that's harder to manage than you can imagine, but you know, our hope is that our role in this will be that we can dispel some of that mismatched power. And it looks like very, very small returns, because ultimately, as soon as you're looking at a return that is anything above about 4.5%, the person that probably is getting screwed is the farmer.
And so is the thinking more to suck change through the system from consumers or
Both.
from above?
Look, it's got to be both. And the reality is the consumer shift is something that just about every person in this sphere is working on, and it will be slow because it's tied implicitly in with cultural change. And we have an abundance mentality. We can have whatever we want whenever we want it at a price we're willing to pay. But the truth is that the true cost of food is buried in government subsidies and in ecological loss and in cultural loss and in community loss. So all of those costs are not actually shining through the true cost of food. So look, how that's going to roll out remains to be seen, but we do actually at some point need to acknowledge that the true cost of food needs to be paid for by someone. Yeah, thank you.
Is it worth mentioning just the difference of how farmers should be measuring success? Like not just consumers, but obviously how we measure profitability in the language for farmers as well. Because that's kind of related to that in terms of it's not about yield, it should be about profitability.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually making money rather than expectations of just more and more and more with higher ecological loss.
Did everybody hear that? I think I'm better off just giving you to say exactly that again.
No.
Go.
I think just to answer that question is more that I work with organic producers around the country, and I think more to change the language of how a farmer measures success, and rather than measuring by yield, which is what the conventional farming system measures success by, is actually measuring profitability per hectare and success per hectare rather on a better scale.
What is success anyway in farming, right? I mean, if you don't walk off your land, are you successful? You're still hanging in. Righto, I think we might move on. Steve, we're just waiting on you to join us.
Petra's just gone out, so you're in charge.
I'm in charge. God, look out. Cat's away. Mice will play. Using my phone because I want to make sure I do these guys justice. So the crew that have organised this whole conference have got an impeccable ability to pull together bloody incredible humans onto the same panel. So I'm glad that there's a few more of you that have snuck in to listen to these four, because I've worked with two of them fairly closely, but wow, you read through the backstory on the other two and you are breathtaking humans. Let me tell you who we've got up here. So Rob, raise your hand, Rob. Rob Pekin, who grew up in these lands, actually, was an organic farmer in a previous life and a market gardener. And really since 2004 has been the spearhead of Food Connect in Brisbane. So he founded that. It's a multi-farmer food distribution enterprise with an innovative community-based distribution system. And his partner Emma Kate and himself were also spearheading a really innovative way to take community-led ownership. Just 2 years ago, they raised $2 million in equity from 530 of their customers and supporters to purchase and retrofit the shed that now operates, did you say 30 enterprises? 32. About 32 enterprises out of this one location. He also is one of the advisors for the Sustainable Table. And recently he has worked with Courtney and her partner Ian to put together a community-scale flour mill that works specifically for Queensland conditions. And for the past 2 years, he's been milling flour from all sorts of grains. He was pretty loud as a voice in the foundation of the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance and was a founding director of the international software organisation, the Open Food Network, of which Serenity Hill is here from. I'm exhausted thinking about it. Anyway, you'll hear from him in just a moment. We've also got Stephen Walter, who started growing grain at just the age of 9. From Burrum.
Actually
8, sorry. God, I just shot his career short. Sorry. He farms in Burrum, farms biodynamically, and actually we're going to deep dive into farming practices throughout this conversation, because I think it's those kind of stories that really bring this stuff to life. And there's some statistics here that I'm going to read to you. A La Trobe University study found that the soil water infiltration rates at Burrum to be 7 to 14 times greater compared to its conventional neighbours. That is unbelievable. Stephen loves baking sourdough for his wife Tanya and their 3 children on their 3,000-acre family farm. And during 2020 and to 2022, Steve and Tanya cleared and bagged 317 tonnes of produce, all grown and fed out to the Victorian community. Court is from my neck of the woods. She's a farmer and artist and mother based in Rutherglen. She runs Woodstock Flour with her husband Ian, and they produce whole grain, stone ground flour from organic grain that they and their in-laws grow. Woodstock Flour distributes to artisan bakeries and home bakers across Victoria and New South Wales, and Court sees farming as the most effective way to create landscape change through the building of soil, biodiversity and community. Courtney is passionate about fostering a local grain economy where grain is appreciated and valued for its diversity and regionality. So no longer looking at those 65-cent bags of black and gold flour on the supermarket shelf. And Topher, you are our last. Topher Bohm is an obsessive learner and inquiry who sees intrinsic value in every aspect of culture. He describes himself as the BFG, collecting all of the individual ingredients. I think I read that in a Gourmet Traveller somewhere. Yes, is that what it was in? He spent 4 years as a professional brewer in Sydney and then travelled extensively to Europe and his native Texas, learning old world techniques necessary to make wild mixed fermentation beers. Wildflower was created in 2016, brewing barrel-aged ales, wholly fermented by a diversity of yeasts and bacteria collected from flowers native to New South Wales. He hopes that Wildflower will inspire makers of all kinds to draw on what's around them to craft beautiful things and that bring joy. What an amazing team of 4 we have on the panel. We're here to talk about regenerative ag, and we're here to talk about what impact that can have into the grain sector. We've been asked to keep it at a fairly high level, but we're going to kind of oscillate a little bit between. In order to kick that off, I'm quite keen to ask, over the time that you've been doing what you're doing, and some is long, some is short, but what has been the one thing you would like to share with those who are listening that is worth sharing because it's inspirational and worth us all knowing about? Robert, do you want to kick us off?
Sure.
And then maybe pass it down.
Thanks, and thanks Pippa and everyone for inviting me down. I watched the 2019 recordings relentlessly through COVID. They were so inspiring, so it's just so cool to be here. So one of the as Jade was saying, the single most inspiring thing we did, Emma and I, is we were looking at lots of things when we started Food Connect. There was sort of 4 parallel things we wanted to do. One was a multi-farmer distribution setup aggregation that was based on a community distribution model. The second one was empower young people to go back out and farm. The other one was to set up pathways for access to land in a custodianship model. And the third one was to build a community consumer awareness group that would come together and work with us and farmers in what we were trying to do and build that broad base of knowledge sharing and momentum that would take humanity to where it needs to go. We were renting a warehouse in Brisbane, and our landlord was a lovely guy, but he rarely spent any money on the place, and we were adding to the asset base all the time. We put kitchens in, we put cold rooms in, we done up all the offices, we did all these fancy things, and then we got to about the 10-year mark, and Emma and I, we'd paid him $1 million in rent by that stage, and we were sort of looking at each other going, this sucks. And in the meantime, we went to the Brisbane Convention Centre where they had the big Food and Wine Expo, and we'd always poo-pooed that because it was all la-di-da and they didn't appreciate what we were doing at that sort of grassroots level. But 6 of us got together, Barambah Organics. We were offered a stall at $3,000. for the 4 days, and we went, shit, we can't afford $3,000, and for 4 days that's a lot of work. So we got together with 5 other enterprises and said, why don't we all share this 2 by 3 metre stall for 4 days? And everyone said, yep, $500 in, we're in. And at the end of the 4 days, we had such a wonderful time together. We learnt all about each other's products. We shared, talking and pitching about each other's products. We all had different diverse sets of skills. So like Ugly Duck Jams, she was just amazing at presenting the stall. So she would keep the stall just looking absolutely as pretty as anything and beautifully laid out. But at the end of it, the 6 of us were sitting having a beer, and we were all talking about, one of them was renting out at out in the boondocks where they hated the garlic smells and the landlord sucked. Another one was in another place where there was no public transport and they wanted to employ people from marginalised communities, and it was just really difficult for them. And then we sort of said, well, we're all renting a forklift, we're all renting a printer, we're all paying exorbitant rent, we're all, renting vans or buying vans, and we've got this there are all these barriers from an overheads point of view in front of us, and we all sort of said, wouldn't it be great if we're all in the one warehouse together, and we just shared the printer and the forklift, and and we had the same sort of just lovely conversations and sharing of knowledge and this diverse skill set where we were learning off each other. Wouldn't it be great if we're all in the same warehouse together? And so we put our heads together. We weren't thinking it was going to be our warehouse, but eventually when we pressured Wayne, the landlord, we sort of thought, well, actually, this warehouse is joined to another warehouse, which is joined to another warehouse. It's quite a big space. In the end, we didn't have any money. We're a social enterprise. We're employing about 35 people at the time. There was absolutely no way we'd get any capital from the traditional banks, and the equity crowdfunding legislation had just been passed. No one knew anything about it except this chick from New Zealand. And she was flown over to give a hot desk by the Queensland government for 6 months. And we met her at the plane and just become big fanboy of her. Emma did the course, and 6 months later we realised we could actually use this model to raise money. We had to raise $2 million. We've now raised just over $3 million in equity, and all sorts of really funky financial things that we're bringing into the RIF in terms of access to that capital really flexibly and at it was right time, right money and right mindset from the investor's point of view. Anyway, we successfully raised over nearly $2.2 million in that first raise over 3 months from 522 people at the time. But the incredible thing was the 6 impact investors, or the 7 impact investors that I went and spoke to, because bearing in mind this is a custodianship model, not a land play or an asset play, which a lot of them were thinking this is going to be an asset play. And when I spoke to the impact, and we had 4 wealthy individuals from Melbourne say, we'll buy that warehouse for you, we'll put $4 million down, but Emma said that's not shifting the dial on anything, that's just 4 white guys from Melbourne. What's the difference between them and 1 white guy from Brisbane? And so the six there was another impact investor who leant into the idea of not having the asset as the capital base, the appreciation of the asset as because I kept saying, it's just steel on steel. What value is that compared to all of the enterprises inside this building doing amazing things? Like that's the real impact, that's the real investment. And because I was very worried that some of them would say, yep, you can have $200,000, $300,000 in equity, but I've got to go on the board, or I need to be, I need to have my whatever it is, 7%. I mean, some of them come to us and said we'll have 15% returns, and we just sort of. So it was a long time filtering through, and eventually found 7 impact investors who funded $1 million, and the community come in with the other $1 million and a bit more. And but the 7 impact investors who had a lot of money were really leaning into what we were trying to do in the world rather than the asset play or the financial play and everything else. And they were very inspired because Emma wrote the offer document, which is the prospectus, and she wrote it in a way that we filtered out. We wanted to filter out the sort of extractive investor types, business as usual. And Emma had a secret ambition that she wanted, because women are currently underrepresented in owning, industrial land and these sort of things. She had a secret agenda to have at least 50% of the ownership with women. We ended up with 84% of the ownership from women. It was remarkable, and that was the most inspiring thing that probably, has tipped me into this space where I'm working with Jade and the amazing funders who are coming together to basically uproot this extractive ownership model into something that we can all lean into. And as Matt was saying before, we only know 2% of what's happening in the soil. I think we only know 2% of what we have in our heads and our hearts and our hands. As a society, I think there's so much, and I saw that in that raise. There were so many people leaning into all their faculties to a different idea, a different model that was inspiring from the heart. It wasn't something, they were thinking about in terms of, what can I get out of this, from a revenue point of view. We had many tough conversations. We had to leave a lot of investors and say, listen, no thanks, I'd love your money, but no thanks, because that's going to hamstring us down the track. So it's, no worries.
Well, to Courtney.
Sorry.
I guess we've been milling flour for over 6 years, and we've only recently purchased our own 100 acres in Rutherglen, maybe nearly 2 years ago now. So in terms of the regenerative farming thing, when we're out on our own, we're still really on the ground learning a lot. But I guess what I've learnt from my in-laws, from Ian's parents who are in Berrigan, where most of the grain comes from, it's a certified organic farm. And they've got a long way to go in terms of regenerative farming practices, but I've just learnt from them and their consistency through a pretty bad drought and some very wet years that I've been hanging out with Ian, that organic farming and their approach to growing grain just results in quality and results in this consistent flavoursome grain. So that's kind of given Ian and I hope as we're trying to push our organic grain growing into this regenerative space where we're moving away from tillage, and we're trying to incorporate more mixed species into our rotations. Just knowing that consistency and that quality has always been there, even though yields have kind of fluctuated, has been, really, really nice for us to see. And just seeing firsthand with my in-laws' property, the resilience of that system as well. When you see our neighbours, the quality of their grain really, like the protein levels not hitting it, or shot and sprung in the wet, or like all these different issues that in this organic system we've been able to avoid. So I guess Ian and I are kind of taking that forward with us onto our new farm. But then also, it was only one thing, but one more thing was just that there's been so much support for what we're doing as well, which has been we really jumped into this as a way to be farming. We jumped into flour milling because we wanted to be farming, and we figure grain is this undervalued product, and so if we mill it, we can be making more value from that. But we've just been embraced with open arms from the baking community, and very much thanks to John Reid and to Michael James and to this whole GrAiNZ community, we've been able to keep the propeller moving forward. But that's been, we didn't expect that.
Okay. I guess sitting here struggling to think what I'm going to say, but I think apart from what I really like is the connection with our customers, that feedback, that passion and seeing what they're doing. But if I'm honest, what I really love and get most joy out of is just looking at the soil, the improvement. I can remember sitting on the tractor as a teenager, working, we've got mixed soils and this red ground. You'd have to sow the crop twice because the first time it would die because it had crust over, and now looking at this soil, it's beautiful brown, full of life, looking at the mushrooms in your wheat crop. And so, yeah, that's what makes me the most proud and gives me the most joy, is just looking at the soil and how far it's come.
I have the misfortune of speaking after 3 people, but also the fortune of maybe trying to listen and then come up with what I want to say in terms of what's the most inspiring. Firstly, I feel like a massive fraud for being here at all. Have no clue why I've been enveloped by this GrAiNZ community, and I feel very fortunate for that. But leaving that aside, I really think the thing that I find most inspiring, the thing that keeps me going, with at least very little sleep, 3 kids, a business that's probably not viable, is well, I mean, Cord actually said it, is the actual resilience in the system. And not only does that come from farming in a way that builds resilience and builds, I like to talk about it as like building an immune system. You're sort of throwing everything at the, well, I think about it this way, at least in our beer. Sometimes I apply it to other things, but throwing everything at the land, or at least our beer, or everything, and just seeing how the land responds. Or I mean, I'm not a farmer, so I'm not going to go too far into that. But these systems, these regenerative organic systems, or agroecological, however you want to call them, do tend to be able to weather these ebbs and flows in, let's just say, different ways, or maybe better ways. And I think that potentially, if processors are also on board with that, and this is my big passion point, is like talking to the people who are one step further and saying, okay, like, Stu, my monster is just sitting in the back here. We're going to have a lot of black tip barley this year because it was wet. And so I need to be talking to my colleagues in the industry and saying, like, that has nothing to do with the flavor impact of your beer. Like, you need to be buying this and not just jump ship to Joe White and the Cargills. Because you just look into a bag and it doesn't look the same. I mean, it's the same stuff as imperfect fruit. So if we have resilient farming systems, and also resilient sort of processors as well, who are willing to work with the ebbs and flows of the season, then we do have a more resilient system. And I think that's something that I talk about a little bit when I do talk about these things, is that Stu and I, along with the grower that grows the majority of our grains, and we use a lot of Ian and Courtney's grains as well, we know our price, basically, at sowing. And we can set that price based on acre or based on ton, depending on the year. And if that needs to go up or down, that's just a frank conversation between Stu, myself, and the grower. We're not affected by grain not getting out of Ukraine because of a war. That is a more resilient food system. And it's because of the connection. I think that's certainly the biggest reason that we keep going. I mean, the amount of times, if any of you run small businesses, I'm sure it's the same, the amount of times you're sitting there at 2 in the morning trying to finish off the work so you can start work again at 6 in the morning, thinking, why the fuck do I do this? The phone call that I couldn't make is 2 phone calls I couldn't make to close my business. Is one to Stu, to say, sorry, I'm out. And the other is to our grower. And I think that, like, being held to that by those people just shows the power of human connection. And I think that by far, amongst the resilience in the farming, the resilience in the food system, it's the resilience that we each other give each other by being a part of something, together, and we're sort of co-investors in our products. So that was the most inspiring thing to me.
And it tells us why you do this. It tells us why you get out of bed. I feel like we didn't quite get that answer out of you guys, and I want to understand that, because I feel like you guys have both got incredible amounts to share. Why do you do this? You've been doing this since you were 8 years old. I imagine it feels like it's in your DNA, but there's mushrooms growing in your wheat crops that may or may not make sense to people in the room. For some who don't understand regenerative farming practice, can we deep dive a little bit deeper into what it is that gets you out of bed, and also your practices? I want to understand, and I want everyone else to understand, why your practice is so fundamentally different to other commodity grain growers.
What gets me out of bed? Debt? No. Debt. I just love what I do. I really just enjoy it thoroughly. I mean, there's times when I wonder what I'm doing and it's a bit too much, but I just love growing grain, and I really do enjoy looking at the soil and nurturing the soil. It's just something I've just grown up with. So a bit about my farming practices. So we're Australian Demeter certified biodynamic, which is accredited system. I guess quickly, the fact I like it, it's a simple recipe that if you follow that recipe, you get the same repeatable results. I've been fortunate enough to purchase more land in my time, and I've seen the same results time and time again. So it's a good resilient system. The grain growing side of things, we probably, it's about a third to a half of the farm is grown in cash crops we'll call it, and the rest is a mixture of cover crops, green manures and resting. So it's very different to the traditional conventional farmers where it's basically continuously cropped, the whole lot's cropped every year. So that's one big difference. What else would you like to know? Or pass it on?
Can I ask a quick question? Do you rest under animals, or do you just rest it and let go to pasture?
Yes, I run animals. I'm very busy, and the livestock have to fit in around me, so I sort of buy and sell when I've got the feed, and I'll sell them as soon as I need to. So I basically just buy in wethers to do a job. I haven't got the time or the energy to be running breeding stock and then not being able to sell them when I run out of room. So that's it.
Before you hand over, are there any other questions for Steve? Yeah, not there, not there. Yeah.
I suppose a big proponent of regenerative agriculture is not tilling, but I know in biodynamics, with the green manure, turning it in is important, especially with the preparation 500. Is that something you do?
Yes.
Everybody hear that question?
So the question was about tillage. Regen sort of built on. So Regen Ag sort of built on non-tillage, I suppose, and lots of other criteria. And I guess, to be honest, I sort of distanced myself from Regen for a long time. I sort of saw it as watering down certified Demeter biodynamics. Maybe another form of greenwashing, but I've come to realise that it's getting what's got the momentum, and someone explained to me is just think of it as life, and that's what I'm all about on the farm, is soil life. So yes, I do cultivate, but that art of cultivation has been lost. I've got videos of my cultivated farm and my neighbour's not cultivated farm. His is blowing in the wind. It's zoom around to mine and it's not moving. My soils don't blow because they're full of life. The biology heal the soil really quickly, so it just doesn't blow, it doesn't wash. I've still got fungi in cultivated soil. The wheat crop's fully cultivated. You still get the fungi. So I think if you do it properly, careful, considered cultivation consciously, you can still have soil life and improve your soil, but obviously nothing destroys the soil quicker than bad cultivation.
Is there another question?
Mine was related to that, more about tillage and meeting regenerative ag in a couple of decades, or do you foresee a time when you'll be able to run a biodynamic farm with constant cover?
Look, I've experimented with it a few times, tried roller crimping, and I haven't worked out how to do it properly yet. I'm still learning. We're in a very variable climate, hot, dry summers. sometimes it's very hard to grow enough cover to plant into. So I haven't given up. It's a work in progress. I haven't seen the examples of other people doing it, but so I'm observing and hoping and watching and learning and watch this space, I guess.
That's something I really admire about Steve and Tanya, is that they've been innovating like constantly over the time that we've known these guys. So I think you guys are doing an amazing job. I think the tillage question is super complex, and it's very easy for people to weaponize tillage when there's far more factors to consider, like many more factors to consider, I should say. We're definitely trying to move our little farm away from tillage, and we see a lot of hope in the perennial wheats and the taller varieties. But we also think that it's important to be striving for diversity and to just be monitoring soils and actually evaluating what impact tillage is having on your soils. So we're moving. We don't do any summer fallows on our little farm, and that's really important for maintaining live roots in your soil for as long as possible. And then there's one plough before we sow our wheat crop. If we did do a summer fallow, we would get a higher yielding wheat crop for sure, but then there would be ramifications longer term in terms of soil biology. So I feel like I don't think there's enough happening. Like, there's just not enough regenerative organic farmers around. And the organic, Carolyn would know, like, so many of our organic farming community they're aging, they're tired, there's a lot of pressure on grain growers. But yeah, Ian and I are definitely hopeful, and we're enjoying seeing what Jason's doing and what the DPI are doing with the perennial wheat, and definitely not giving up. But I just think it's worth being wary of the language around grain growing, because it's often simplified when it's far more complex.
I'm just going to quickly mention, just to add to that, is a bit like you, Jason. The outcome is what you focus on with the mill grains. So whether you use a roller mill or a stone mill, it's the outcome. And I think with every farm, it's the outcome. The soil life that Steve expressed. Doesn't matter the methodology you approach that farming, and this is probably the most exciting thing about the regen side of things, is it's bringing a broader church or broader base of expertise to what we all want, which is healthy soils and healthy food, and then healthy planet. And so whatever way we get there is the way where we really deeply immerse our hearts and our heads into that intellectual challenge, and it is incredibly complex. For, like your market gardener said, it's much more complex than rocket science. Like, it really forces us to engage so much more, particularly, I'm at the consumer-facing end, and, how do I engage consumers where out of their own volition, they, take a fork in the road and absolutely commit themselves to, growers like this. They absolutely commit themselves to eating healthily. They absolutely commit themselves to how can they invest every part, their money, and that's what we've done with the shed. They invested their money through a participation model that wasn't around extraction or returns or anything like that. So this is the challenge for humanity, is how do we do this as a community where we don't judge, where we really share our knowledge. And this is the great thing about the RIF. The RIF, if you read the RIF, that Sustainable Table have spent a lot of time on. It's been written by, I think, nearly all women. Josh might be the only bloke. Josh is an Indigenous fella, and Dan, and Wolfgang, he's a bloke too. But the RIF document is written in such a way where it sort of doesn't make anyone wrong, it doesn't put anyone down, it doesn't say, your business model is, it just says it's either Horizon 1, Horizon 2 or Horizon 3. And together we need all those horizons to get to the place where we're not in planetary overshoot and we're not just hurtling humanity off the edge of the cliff. We're working on that together, and it's going to take all of us to do that together. So I think, the deepest thing I've experienced in the 30 odd years I've been in this space in my own journey has been to, just lay down my judgments, lay down my all of my preconceived ideas I have about people, particularly people with money. And now I'm in the space where, Alistair, we've had a couple of tough conversations with some investors, and it's been really difficult for us to not get down on our hands and knees and say, please give me that money, to have an eye-to-eye conversation where we've overcome the power relationship, the dispowering I feel whenever I sit down in front of an investor, but also where they're at, where they're coming, I've got all the money and I'll make all the decisions about where that money is used and how it's done. So the RIF is sort of, in a remarkably amazing way, is setting us on a trajectory where we're not in the, where we're not all, sitting around going, borderline edge of viability, what's going to happen next year. Sure, the relationships are great, but geez, it'd be great to have some capital that says, here's 10 years to get to a point where you pay 2.5%.
If Robert gets the microphone again. Kira, yes. Okay, so we're looking for an explanation of what a bricks meter does and what the plants that Stephen's planting impact that.
Okay, so the bricks level, it was spoke about earlier, was during Matthew's talk actually, about how you can judge the nutritional value of your plants or food. The bricks value, it's used in grape growing. It's basically a measure of the dissolved solids in a liquid. So basically you get the leaves off your, I get it off my oat crops or grain crops, squeeze the juice out with a garlic press, put the drops on a sort of like a slide on this prism that you look up through the sun, and that refracts the light, is that the word? And you come up with a measure of how much dissolved solids are in that sap, and that's basically telling you how good the solar panels are working on the plant, how much sugar they're producing. And I often check the plants, and up around the 20 or so, 30, and you look at some of the neighbours and it's down to 3 or 4. The difference that makes to the plant is it's much more resilient to insects, it's more frost resistant because of the higher sugar levels, and it's just a great indication of the health of the plant, how well it's functioning, cycling and working.
What's happening there, Steve? Like, can you talk about the relationship between the plant and the soil a bit? Like in your system, if you're getting such resilience in your plant, it's functioning differently somehow. What's happening?
Okay, so in a biodynamic system where I'm basically a humus farmer, my whole focus is producing humus. That's my main goal. That's the humus that feeds the plant. You probably all know that it was discovered back in the 20s how plants can only take up water-soluble nutrients, which is true, but nature doesn't tolerate waste. There's no inefficiencies in nature. So if you think about it, how does this water-soluble nutrients survive in the soil and isn't leached out? It's to do with the colloids, the humus, that water-soluble nutrients is bound up in that colloid. So in a biodynamic system, we're producing that humus. It's the sun warmth activates the plants to feed roots to feed that on that humus only when it's needed. So the plants are fed differently. Conventional and some organic systems use water-soluble nutrients, so the plant's taking up that nutrients whether it needs to or not. as soon as it transpires, it's taking up those water soluble nutrients. It's in the water, in the soil water, and that they become over nitrated, heavy. You can see the plants hanging down. They're often bitter. Whereas if they're fed naturally how they're designed to, those flavour profiles are in balance. The plant's only fed when it needs to. And the other bonus is your nutrients aren't getting leached into your rivers and streams and causing fish kill and pollution and blue-green algae.
The thing with grains in an industrial system is that they are often subject to very, very long supply chains, of which the farmer is normally just one, or all the players are normally just one component of it. You guys sitting in front of me, though, have attempted multiple components of the supply chain. That adds a whole lot of extra complexity, but it potentially also enables you to maintain control or integrity. I'd love to hear from each of you just very quickly as to which bits, let's be really honest, which bits are, give you a benefit and which bits actually are problematic and difficult.
In our system.
In your multiple, yeah.
I mean, I think they're all difficult, but they all give you benefits. It's sort of one and the same. I mean, for me, I suppose, at least talking from the beer perspective, I got into this because I ate a chicken from Feather and Bone, Grant and Laura. That was literally just just had a proper chicken from them once and was like, that's it. It's the quality. Honestly, it was pretty simple. I'm a bit of a food vigilante, like at least at home, like a militant about what we eat and what we don't eat. And so when you taste something that is so good, it was just immediate that, okay, we have to bring this into my own industry and what we're doing. And so more and more, the overarching thing that we're looking for in our beer is obviously it started with quality, because the quality of the chicken was so much better. And then I thought, okay, surely we can do this with beer. But that's evolving as well to move into a space that is sort of wooey a little bit, but like nourishment. Like, what is it that we are actually doing with the raw materials that we're farming and sort of converting at the malt house and then selling into the industry. And so the thing that I find most challenging, well, is working with those materials alone, but also it's the most beneficial as well, because we hear it all the time from people that people will taste our beer and they'll say, just I didn't like beer, or I don't drink much beer, or they do love beer, but they as soon as they taste it, they say that their palate somehow responds in a way that just tells them that that's good for them. And it's definitely not. I mean, it's alcohol. Like, it's a poison. It's very much a drug that I actually like. Actually, that probably is the most challenging part of what I do, is the fact that we are making a fermented beverage that probably does more damage on the earth than any other drug that's out there. I mean, it's a bit sad to talk about, but it's the reality that we're peddling this product that has so many factors in the negative, and it's something that I have definitely tried to justify what we do by bringing this kind of meaning into it, I suppose, like not only the nourishment, but working with people, because at the end of the day, a beer is a really easy way to ask people to come around a table. You don't. I mean, you can break bread with them, you can have a beer, but it's very different when you ask a mate to go grab a beer with you. Or you never say, "Can I go grab a glass of wine?" Like, it just doesn't work. So it is this kind of way to get people around, and so it's sort of this glue to, at least, or like it's a conduit to speak about things. But the challenge is probably the alcohol. I mean, if we could make our beer taste the same without the inebriant, I think that would be really cool. We don't do any non-alcoholic beers. I'm sort of just strictly into what we do. But the exciting part is how the product ends up delivering to the customer. But they're sort of intertwined, I suppose, the challenge, anyway, and the opportunity, I guess, is the answer.
So the challenges in the growing or the distribution, or?
The fact that you do multiples. So lots of sectors, they just become the specialist in one, but you guys have all attempted to undertake multiple components of the supply chain on your own.
yeah, I guess it's the work-life balance. It really is. It's struggling with that a bit at the moment, being overwhelmed, but that's really the only challenge. We're pretty, you know, we're independent. We're a long way from anywhere. We just get it done, and so Tanya's more the marketing and that side of things. So she'd have different challenges.
The bit that works?
The bit that works, well, we've got a great distribution network, and we've streamlined it. COVID made a big difference with how we did things. Basically, when we started, was small, and we'd just do anything for anyone. If someone wanted a 3.5 kilo bag, we'd give them a 3.5 kilo bag, and you know, literally do anything for anyone. But we had to streamline. We couldn't manage that, so we've cut things out. We're a bit stricter with how we do it, and so that's been a big help. Just how we manage all that.
Steve and Tanya's operation is also like so tidy, and Ian and I have a joke in the flour mill that we just say like, what would Tanya do? we should probably sweep the floor a little bit more than we do, because they're such hard workers. But I think what's in common with the guys that I'm sitting with here on this panel is this like generosity and this collaborative nature. Like Steve and Tan have been very generous in sharing their knowledge with us, and you know, welcoming us on their farm. Topher has opened up his brewery to us. He hosts a pickup point for us through the brewery, so he uses our grain in his beer, but he also allows bakers to come and pick up their flour from his brewery, which like that kind of generosity is huge to us, because logistics is an awful thing for us to manage with flour, because it's heavy and it's not that valuable. I mean, yeah, we do, like, our prices are true to what it costs us, but it's still a very heavy product that we need to ship. And as much as we would like to stick to a 100-kilometre radius of our farm, the reality is that there's a long way to go in terms of educating consumers, and like maybe it's also a socio-economic problem. Like our customers are mostly in urban environments where maybe there's more of an appetite and a budget for what we're doing. So logistics and getting our head around that is huge. And also the cost of storage as a small farm. Like we want to have clean grain on farm, so that we can be milling year round. But it's much easier for a farmer to harvest their crop and then just send it off in a truck. So it's like the cost of a silo is, I don't know what it cost us. What did it cost us, Ian? Like 20 grand per, is it 20 grand? Yeah. Like very expensive in terms of the infrastructure we need. And then on top of that, the cost of logistics is huge. Was there another part to the question? The bit that works. Well, I guess I touched on that with this collaborative nature. And then, of course, with Rob, he's kind of been a mentor for us in terms of, I don't know, just bouncing ideas. We were discussing buying a property with an investor, and Rob was able to walk us through that, like just having Rob as a sounding board. But Rob's also setting up the Salisbury Mill, and he was able to work with Ian, and Ian and his brother built a flour mill, which is now in Brisbane. So like Rob, and like I guess the nature of the regen community is that like generosity and that knowledge sharing across, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, the bit that works, the constraint has been we're trying to operate business models with a true cost agenda in a business as usual world, and that's been, you know, challenging for all of us, and the cost of living crisis last year really exacerbated that. But it's also a bit of a silver lining in the fact that we now recognise it, and it's probably made a lot more investors come to the table, because it's, you know, it's an unsolvable conundrum, the cost of living crisis and all the food insecurity and the health and all the things that maths you mentioned, and yet on the same time you've got all these amazing farmers and amazing value adders and brewers and everyone trying to do things at the right price, but a borderline viability. So that's been the real challenge, and I think you know, I'm really excited about the business models of the future, where we use all of our faculties. The piece that's been really great has been the relationships. Wish we had more time for these relationships. You know, it's so important that, and I love beer. Beer, bread, and butter are my three things. And the beer thing, I think we've got to sort of, it's like a lot of things, we've just got to get everything in moderation, and beer and wine elevate our spirits to a level where we can talk about things that we wouldn't talk about previously. And I think, you know, it's the same sort of thing. And that's really good. We've got to be really, you know, honest. And also get shit out, you know, like, you know, we bottle so much of it up, particularly us blokes. Beer gives us an opportunity to have those D&Ms and get them out. So I'm all for beer, and I'm all for getting around table and having those. You know, it's where we fall in love. You know, we fall in love over that first. Generally, I should maybe. I know. So more time for having just beautiful relationships and having those real deep, rich, authentic conversations where we plough into the 98% of what we don't know exists. And for me, it's been working with Aunt Lilla, Uncle Cal, Aunt Mary Graham. I don't know if you've heard of Aunt Mary Graham, but we've got this amazing Indigenous elder group up in Brisbane who are so tapped into the depths of, you know, they just channel the elders from so many years ago, pre-Cook, and it blows my mind. It's so subtle, but it blows my mind in terms of the business model when I listen to, you know, conflation of power and authority, Aunt Lilla. There's so many subtle but profound bits of wisdom they have in their culture that we have access to, but we need to immerse ourselves in. And they always say, just come and have a cup of tea with us. So it's not over a beer or a wine, because they have issues around that, very real issues. But having a cup of tea with an elder is probably one of the richest ways we can plough into that other 98%.
Thank you, Robert. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and so I very quickly want to just go through. You guys are true leaders in the regen space, and you know, there's lots of reason to feel a bit overwhelmed at times, but you guys are actually walking the talk. And I know we've talked about challenges, but can you finish with just one thing that's actually really exciting you on the horizon?
Okay, I'll go first. Let me think.
What's exciting me on the horizon? We've been developing these heritage grains. That's an exciting project. I'm not sure where it's going to go and what the interest will be, but I just love growing different grains and different varieties, so that's been exciting. So that's probably a big one for me.
What are those grains?
What have we got? We've got a red wheat Yakora. That's, it's not that commonly consumed in Australia, but we've got some of that going. We've got a purple straw, which is supposed to be a good, like a biscuit or cake flour. What else have we got? We've got some purple grains, so very dark purple. So the actual grain's purple, so that'll be interesting, yeah.
I'm also very excited about the diversity that's being fostered in GrAiNZ. I think that's really exciting and has huge potential, which I've already mentioned, for regenerative cropping. But I guess as a young farmer who's only, we've only had our own place for 2 years, I'm just excited to build our farm in the way that we want to, and it's very slow work and it's very expensive work. I think we're paying $50,000 in interest rates this year, which is painful. So I'm excited for that to end. But I think Ian and I studied environments at uni, and we were really excited to get into it. And like, you have that you just want everything to happen now, but with farming and with grain growing, it's like a yearly thing, and in each year we're learning more and more. So that's just an exciting part of farming for me, that each year brings new experiences and an understanding of what we're doing.
Okay, with some time to think. Something that's exciting to me, or that I'm excited about going forward, and what I'm sort of seeing is the diversity of stakeholders that are taking part in what we are calling this larger regenerative agriculture movement, let's say. And that definitely includes the customer side. And so from my perspective, I mean, the fact that I'm here talking at the GrAiNZ conference just shows that this is growing. You know, we're crossing sectors more and more, and more people I speak to, no matter what part they are in. You know, I'm often on wineries or kitchens or grain farms. We're sort of pointing towards the same. Well, we're going somewhere. You know, I sort of feel that movement. Personally, we're sort of, Courtney told you to mention this, I'm excited about, we're starting a cheesery on site at the brewery, using this tiny micro dairy 40 minutes south of us, who Saputo is just about to pull out of the entire area. So this whole 20 farms aren't going to have anyone to be milking their cows. Anyway, picking up their milk, there's all of these structural things that are happening because of $2 milk, however many years ago. That we're not going to be even close to solving that. Not even, like, we're talking one farm and picking up like 2 milkings a week. But we're at the brewery. I think I'm selfishly trying to build this like larder of people and foods and products that I just want to eat at home myself. And the access is really fucking tough, right? Like, we are very fortunate to have Feather and Bone really, really close to us in Sydney, and they have an amazing like little pantry of things. But we need. I just realized in my own in my own home, I want that access, and I'm very fortunate to be in a position where if I need something, I can generally call someone who makes butter, who whatever. But that's not how it is for everyone, and the diversity of people coming into that is that as we're sort of pushing a little bit in this way of trying to put those products in the same place for a customer who is keen but maybe time poor, we're very willing to spend their dollar there, and that's, as a business operator, exciting.
This is going to sound like I'm being placed here, but the most exciting thing that I'm really looking forward to is working with Sustainable Table and the advisors on the RIF. It is probably the most profound financial document that you will see in the world, apart from maybe RSF Finance's work that they've done over 10 or 15 years. It's a huge opportunity for this sector and it's tricky though, because we've got to go in there with boots and all to have really frank conversations with the people who have got the money. There's a massive amount of capital out there that needs to be unlocked. It's almost like I was talking to Emily earlier on about dehulling. How do we dehull that industry and open it up, and we get the whole wheat, the whole flour from that humanity that sits behind the gatekeepers that protect that money. And so I really encourage you to read the RIF, the whole RIF. It was written by a bunch of women. It really, it's paradigm shifting, and it's transformative in terms of what it's asking people with the money to do in terms of going into this space here. We all sort of really need that to have more time to have relationships with each other and do really great mischief together.
Thank you. Before we all head for lunch and do mischief together, I just want to summarise very quickly by reflecting on Paul Hawkins' statement. He talks about regeneration in its entirety as life-giving decisions that ultimately result in positive or life-giving outcomes to humans, to animals, to cultures, to ecosystems, and every single one of us has capacity to contribute to that every single day, not least of which in the way we choose to eat our food. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our amazing panellists. Lunch.
Thank you, Ian. We need an empty. You can come and stand behind me, that's fine, because we're mixing croissants. And otherwise you don't see what's going on. So we got a sweet starter, because our pastries are 100% sourdough. And we got Ian, thank you. Look, Ian there, wave. He's my mentor, so he taught me everything. So and he's listening to me, he should go outside. Because now I'm getting scared. I'm not here to explain too much biology and stuff. I can, but we don't have the time for that. I can do that later, and you can also ask Ian. I decided to do a croissant mixing workshop, because everybody, YouTube and everything is full of how to laminate croissants, we all know that. But mixing, I think, is where a lot, and fermentation absolutely, but there is also a lot of mixing. And so I decided, let's show people how we mix. And that's how we do it. So I just started off. Michael, is the milk on? Yeah. So we weighed everything off. Let me get my thoughts together. We've got a sheet. So quiet. Hold on. They're all excited.
I wonder what I saw.
Need a scraper. Anybody scraper? You got one, Mike? So today we're mixing with an organic flour, which is really exciting, because I've only been mixing with this flour for like 2 weeks, thanks to Michael. Michael has been saying, mix with that one. So, and I've been trying, and it actually got really good results. So, thank you, Whole Grain Milling, because I donated this flour, part of it. More bags. Luckily, everything has been weighed up, so I don't have to think. So we put our flour in first. There's just some practical things that we do. I'm a bit OCD with my mixing. We take the temperature. Temperature is really important. Thanks, Michael. Temperature, and we got some malt as well. That's from Voyager as well. These guys are here today, or over GrAiNZ. Again, thanks to Ian, because he got me in touch with these guys.
So why are you measuring? Why are you checking the temperature?
Yeah, so if you got questions, just shoot. Don't wait, just shoot. Well, because temperature is really important for fermentation. So if you have a sourdough croissant, anything that goes wrong, you will see in the end result. and so you need to be very particular. And so fermentation is really important, temperature is really important. And so we have a log where we write all of our temperatures down. We know the temperature of our starter because that's in the prover overnight, 28, 29 degrees. So the only thing that we have to play with is the flour. Hold on, because Michael, my baker, did give me a good tip. So let's just mix it through. Because sometimes when the bag, we've got concrete floors here, and then the bottom of the bags are colder than the top. So sometimes we mix through. I never do that, but Michael does it.
Yeah. I don't actually know if it really. I feel like if we mix it a fair while, then it actually evens out the temperature.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's good.
Yeah, I was always wondering.
No, it's good. I think so. Okay. What's the date? Is it first? So we got 16.2, Michael.
Is that colder than
I'm going to let you do it.
That's really cool, actually.
Yeah, but yesterday was 14, mate. It's really dropping because the nights are getting so cold. I'm going to let Michael do the calculation. What calculation? We estimate, but we... Yeah, water and milk. Yeah. Both. Yeah, you can go outside, sweetie. There's heaps of breakfast. Yeah. Where is the iPad? Ah, yeah. So the only thing that I need to now measure is my starter. Yeah, whole grain milling. This flour needs way more water than the euros, so we're toggling in between with formulas. So I need to make sure that we're right. 8.9. My system. This 5 minutes more. Is that normal?
Yeah. No. It's good if they leave eye color though. Then you can just on the spot mix another half slab for that.
Have you done that?
I've done it, I think.
Really?
Yes.
Great.
So for your starter, what flours are you using for that?
This would be euro, but we use the same flour, basically. So I always put a little bit more in because you got losses.
Out of order, it has to be a challenge with the temperature.
Good luck, Michael. Yeah, so it's been cold. I need another.
But Mum, you've already got a plate.
Yeah, this one isn't good. I don't like the plastic ones for this. So this is a sweet starter. There is some here if you want to taste or smell. There's quite a bit of acidity in there. Where is he?
What's your target temperature?
Which one? For my dough or my end dough? Yeah, it's about 29, 30 degrees. And then we bulk it for about 6 to 7 hours on 28. Hold on, Gordon. Wait, sorry, can you get off? Normally they're not that interested. You want to be on TV?
I'm already on TV.
Ah, that's why they're interested. You can be famous, sweetie. You want to be famous?
Me too. I have so many pictures. Yum, 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 yum. Mini TV.
So, because I'm OCD.
Michael, do you have a TV
Not really
box on
OCD,
here.
but you know.
Why?
I almost forgot more flour.
I noticed though, like, it does.
Small bags, if you got 25 kilo bags, you just bang them in. Ah, careful. Okay, so we use raw sugar as much as possible in our bakery. And so not in our sweet starter, but we do put it in our dough. I reckon it gives more flavor. I don't know what it does with fermentation, but it works. Michael. Okay, so Michael is here to put the milk in. What is the salt?
It's behind you there.
And then,
Can you just tear the scales?
You want to double check the milk?
Yeah, I always do that.
Oh shit, I turned it off. Sorry, mate.
Well, that works too.
Well, we're waiting for the plastic. And then, what's your water temperature? Are you doing that?
I got the water as well.
Hold on. Sorry, guys. You got the mixer?
Bubble.
Did you take a bit more?
Yeah, I always pour
Well,
one cup more.
we always put a bit more in because we always got losses. And I'm very particular with our pastries. 12.3.
More bubble.
Just. He knows how it works. There's a delay. So, you know, we know what we do with our temperatures. You have to take in account that this process will cool it down again. So anything we change will change your temperature. If you put your milk straight into the bowl, if you put in your milk first, the bowl will cool it down. Temperature will change. So consistency, I think, is really important. Always the same steps. So there is a lot of artistic freedom when it comes to croissants, mixing, not much artistic freedom. Consistency. I got myself there. So I also do this this is better for homogenizing everything, getting the sugar dissolved. Because the raw sugar is, it's a bit grainy. But it is also to get that leftover starter out. Corbin, hold on. No more touching the scales. Oh, that's going to be awesome. Jax. Did somebody get my kids outside? Oh, I got no idea. So we're mixing 13 slabs times 80. Average 87 a slab. So I'm not sure. Yeah, enough. Michael, you got the water, mate?
Yeah, I got the water, mate.
I'm gonna put that also in here, boys. Jax.
So if everything is dialed in, then we tend to mix very similar.
So we're almost mixing now.
And then we just have to adjust the temperature. We can keep mixing very much the same. But when we like at least our like it is, but it also
All right, let's go in. And we have not put the salt in. I wait for the salt until we got some gluten or some structure happening before I put it in. You do, and we do a bit of a... Careful. I start with a bit of a reverse, just to pick up things. You go reverse, forward, and so that's the more.
Does anybody have any questions?
Great. Yeah, well, mainly the flower changes. So each time we get flower, I ask for the specs. It doesn't really, well, it's kind of a thing that becomes a habit, but then you realize that you need to have the feeling of the dough in order to really adjust. Specs can only say that much. Like sometimes the specs are like the same and you're like, yeah, the mixing will be the same. Oh my God, it's completely different. So, but I can't kind of keep on doing it. What about
water temperature?
Yeah, because of course it gets warm. So your temperature, that's logic, because your flour is warm. But then mainly your flour changes throughout the year. So you get your new flour around December, January. You'll start blending in new grain, so new season. So you're gonna have to adjust to that, and your amount of water as well. Like I said, we usually mix with euro of lauki, and it stays pretty stable. But yeah, like with this one, it's like I think 3% more, 2 or 3% more hydration, which is a lot. Just it's same season flour, so it's different flour, and so hydration. If you change flour over the seasons, it changes a little bit, not hugely, and then I recalculate. But it's mainly temperatures, and then also the way you mix. That I feel changes throughout the season, and then your fermentation as well. Like, and sometimes you just can't get it out. Like this flour. You feel that your croissants are more like. And then, like around this time, your croissants are just more active and sometimes overactive. Kim was saying this morning, oh my God, we have these too. I don't understand. And, you need to let the flour speak to you as well. And then you adjust as baker. That's what makes your life and your job interesting, If you're just pushing a button all the time, it's not really cool. So you do have to think, and I call it Fingerspitzengefühl. For those that speak German.
I think the different batch of flour, I think that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Like that.
But the bread too.
Yeah.
And then and then they mill, and then each 2 or 3 weeks they're milling, and then that changes things too. So. And especially around changing season, Yeah, changing season. It's like, oh God, it's a puzzle, but keeps your mind active for sure. So
how are your shifts like for?
Sorry.
Do you have like a
Shift system. So day 1 we build up our starters. Day 2 we mix and ferment. Then it goes into the fridge overnight. And then day 3 we are laminating. And then day 4 we do our first bake. So this one will be baked tomorrow, a part of it. But it's always better the day after. So day 3 we're basically laminating and shaping for. No, this one is not tomorrow. The one in the fridge is for tomorrow. You see, I'll lose my own track. So we're basically laminating usually for the 3 following days, and then keep in the fridge. We pull them out. Goes into the brewer for about 14 to 16 hours overnight, and you can have a look. So I'm getting a little bit of consistency. So I'm thinking that I'm gonna start. Michael, you wanna come have a look, mate? I'm gonna start. You've put it in earlier, no?
No, I put it in later.
Ah, later. Oh, that's all right. That's all right. You can start thinking about putting salt in now. Just we use it 4 minutes left.
Yeah, 3.
Ah, you see, that's all right.
So you're
I think those are fine. Mariasha? Yeah.
And your balcony, you scale as you do the blocks of it, or just?
Yeah, we cut them out. So Michael will be doing that. He's got more muscles than I do. That's not good. Female power. But it's true. He cuts. Well, I tried to challenge the guys with cutting out huge amount of those, but then I saw afterwards like, oh. But yeah, we weigh off on the slabs, and then they go ferment. So our bulk. So I'm gonna put my. You see, we got a bit of consistency here. You know, it's very rough still, but you know, I think that's good for our salt. I put it more in the middle than the outside, because otherwise it stays on the outside. Look, it depends from mixer to mixer. And I'm also going to go a little bit in reverse. The challenge is to get all the salt absorbed in the time that we got left when we're mixing. Colin, don't stand on that, please. Wow. Oh, it's about, overall, it's going to be 2%. Yeah. Just basic. I'm not playing with salt when it comes to croissants. Because, you know, this enhancing but inhibiting factor, so with croissants it's very, it took a while to get to this stage. 7 years been making sourdough pastries now. Huh? No, yeah, 100%. So you need to know a little bit about fermentation, or maybe a lot, in order to tweak your process. So I've learned a lot over the last few years. I started with basic knowledge. I've got an engineering background, which plays in my advantage. But I've done electronics, so not that much microbiology. But it definitely, if you understand what's going on, you can tweak things. Otherwise, you decide, but like Michael James, great baker, he doesn't know any of that, and he's just got his fingerspitz in the food. So it's a fine balance of. Sometimes you're too much in your thinking as well. When you're like, oh, and this and that, and you're trying to adjust things, and it doesn't work. Sometimes you just have to let go and just look and read your dough and what is it saying, you know, you got your instincts. And I do find balance too, because yeah, I'm very. Yeah, my build up, I've got a high inoculation, very short one. But this one is, here, you want to smell? Where is the starter? Oh yes. Talk about acidity. Yeah. Sonny, what's the sugar? Do you remember? I think I'm at 25% at the moment. But I've been playing around. That's why my brain is like, I've been playing around with 30 and 20. But I'm pretty sure I'm 25 at the moment. But it's playing around with everything, with timing, temperatures, and you can only switch one thing at the same time. So it takes ages to kind of. Look, I perfectionize. I'm nowhere. Well, I'm happy, but there is always room for improvement. Sorry. Just checking the dough. Shouldn't be doing that because it's interrupting my mix. Alright. Has everybody had breakfast?
Not yet.
Baguette? I think I made too many baguettes. That will go to the board and lunch as well.
Yeah. Sorry.
Did everybody have a good sleep? Yeah?
Yeah.
Good sleep? Good. Everybody was asking this morning, nah, they didn't have a good sleep.
Too excited.
Yeah, new beds.
What time do you start the bed?
I start at 5.
And is that extended?
Yeah, in the week, yeah. At the end of the week we start a bit later, a little bit earlier, and then in the weekend we start 3:30. I don't do Ian, say wow to Michael.
What we did today, for the pastries,
Yeah, it was easy. Michael had an easy run.
I've never had it that I'm there till 6 a.m. in the morning.
So yeah, now is always the point, like how far do you mix? I mix to a certain consistency that you got, like, you know, the moons coming together.
Yep.
But again, you kind of need to see with your mixer as well. With a lamination, you work your dough. So your dough gets so much more work after mixing your fermentation. So you can't mix fully.
So it's a fine line.
Yeah, it's very fine line. Yeah. Because I think at the moment with the euro, my dough tears. The croissants today, but it's also because my prover is, the humidity of my prover isn't great at the moment. And I think that's also due to mixing. Or the quality of the flour, and then you have to adjust, and then it's like, oh, are we gonna mix less? Are we gonna dare to do that? Do we really mix 2.5 in seconds? 2.5. I'm like tempted to take it out, but we do window tests. And this flour, because there's a fair bit of hydration into it, the spec says as well that you can mix. And usually it's more mixing, but a smaller window. It's always more mixing, smaller window. It's like, oh. But I don't think that I've ever overmixed a croissant dough. You can, or maybe have you? I don't think. We had some disasters happening, but I don't think we ever overmixed.
No, quite a lot. But we had some, like, I don't know if I want to call it overmix, but we had some doughs that should have had a bit less mixing.
Yeah. If you overmix, we definitely had overmix hot cross buns. It's like chewing gum. It's like, oh my god, it's a disaster. But yeah, you look, the higher the hydration, this is not super hydrated, but the higher the hydration, the harder it is to overmix. So with hot cross buns, I mix very dry, and then I put my butter in there, so then it gets really dangerous to overmix. Yeah. That first mix before the butter, this year it didn't happen. Okay, we're done. So yeah, that's, oh yeah, it feels good. We check temperature. And the scraper, sorry. Yeah, there's something wrong with this one. You have to kind of, it picks up eventually. So you see, you know, a bit of roughness still there. And we do a bit of a window test. No, I haven't said that. Look, I'm going to give you a number, but you can't base yourself on that because it really depends on everything else. So I can tell you, because it depends on your starters. So you need to look at your overall amount of fermented flour, not just the percentage of the starter. A lot of people ask, so I'm at 20.31, which doesn't really say anything unless you know what's in my starters. So you always, when you formulate, Ian knows so much about this, and it's really great when you formulate. You need to look at your overall fermentation, your overall, your total amount of flour and how much you're gonna ferment. So I've got a window, but I've still got some hues. It still breaks, which I think is great. So this is not a fully mixed dough, which is good because for me, we still work it on the bench, and it will keep on developing during fermentation and all of that. So when you got a yeasted croissant, your fermentation times are so much shorter. You probably mix way more.
Okay.
And I got a little bit of grains of the salt as well, but I'm all right. Yeah, that's it. Now we cut out, and we've got 28.6, which is pretty good. I would like a little bit. No, we're going higher. 29. Yeah, I'm happy with this. And now Michael is gonna cut out. And you'll see him cutting out. It's awesome to see. You got your.
I
you got a knife?
I don't use the knife.
28.9, Michael.
Hey?
28.9. Yeah,
I like it when it's over 29, but
yeah, me too.
What's your temperature summer?
Sorry, we're always around the same. Yeah. Because we challenged because the nights have been so cold. The last 2 nights, you can see our logbook. All of a sudden, it drops from like 1 week to the other. You see it drop, and then you have to adjust your. Do you reckon I give it like 20 more seconds?
I think you could.
Okay, we're just gonna do we're gonna play around because I want my temperature a bit higher.
This is about how we mixed it lately, and we had some really good songs like that. But I did take it a bit further than that too, and we still had really good songs. Yeah.
Because I think the Euro is great, and the organic doesn't do that. So we've got dough in there from yesterday that we mixed, and that's going to go to the Gordon, and my head baker Chris will be laminating that dough. So you can see his workshop, and then you see the entire process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you got 29. Yeah, it's alright.
That's fine.
29. Yeah, you got 29 too. Alright, let's cut it out. Do you need my help maybe?
That's right.
So yeah, that's it, guys. You can watch Michael cut out. Thank you. If you got any questions, feel free to ask. And I'd love to hear how you guys mix. Because it's always a riddle for everybody.
When I started baking, it was at Regenerative Bakery with Michael James on GrAiNZ. But at the same time, I started here at the Gordon doing my rotisserie course. So I came from a chef background, and I felt very much that I just knew recipes and I didn't really know what I was actually cooking, and decided that I wanted to venture into baking to get a better understanding of, eventually I wanted to run kitchens and I wanted to know what every section was doing. So I decided to join Michael at Day1 Bakery, which turned into Tiddly Road. And I started here doing my patisserie course with Brendan Hill, who's not here today. But those two guys have had a profound effect on, I guess, where I've gotten to today with my cooking, and especially with the Future Food System project, which is up here, which is what I'm going to talk a bit about at the start, and then I'm going to get to nixtamalisation, because I feel like they're really tied up. But I guess working with Michael, he really taught me a lot of skills about baking, actually cooking with bread, and then being here with Brendan, he was teaching me the skills of patisserie, and both very supportive people. Regenerative Bakery and Tiddly Road Bakery was the first kitchen that I ever worked in where I felt really safe. I felt like I could make mistakes, I wasn't going to get in trouble. I was being taught, and at the same time, Brendan was doing the same thing here. And eventually, when I did go to represent Australia for the World Championship of Pastry in Italy, I looked out and Brendan had actually travelled over to Italy to support the team. So two people who have massively, I guess, assisted to where I've got today. And it wasn't until I started writing Sustain, which comes out at the end of the year, that I realised how important baking was to the Future Food System project, which is really interesting because we weren't growing any wheat. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and the Future Food System. When I was at the bakery, we were working with flour, and I don't know if Michael knows this, but I didn't even know what sourdough was. Kind of my first day, I realised that we were growing a bacteria, that we were leavening bread with that bacteria, and I never shaped a loaf of bread. I never made a croissant. And he really started to show me those skills, and then eventually the recipe kind of ran out, and we started having a few issues. And one day, in particular, we were shaping bread, it was kind of falling apart, and Michael goes, "Oh, the flour's too green." I'm like, what does that mean? And it kind of opened up another portal into what I guess baking was, and milling grain, and that it was an ingredient. It wasn't just a flour sitting on the shelf. So I kind of pictured someone going, kind of harvesting green grain, not realising that it was milled grain, and that it would have an effect on our product when we were making bread. So I started to deep dive into, okay, well, what happens when you start aging wheat, or what happens when you mill it? And then it kind of went to, okay, what's happening when we're growing it and harvesting it, and what's going into the soil? And I probably didn't realise that until Future Food System, that this was the beginning of, I guess, the growing of the food and how important that was. And it was at a bakery, and we were working with one ingredient. And I had been growing food at home in little milk crates. Mine kind of had just moved back from overseas, so we'd always been growing food, but wasn't really in touch. And it was a very clarifying moment that I wanted to be in touch with where food was coming from. So I worked at the bakery for about 3 years. Then I went and worked with another pastry chef, Sean Quaid. And then I met Yost and Matt Stone. And at the time, it was with the Greenhouse projects. So Greenhouse were restaurants where zero waste concept, collecting local food. And I went and started working with Yost at Greenhouse and at Brothel, which is a zero waste bone broth restaurant. And that was really cemented that this is what I want to be doing. I couldn't bake anymore. I don't know how you guys get up that early. It's not for me. But I still really have that passion for the skill of baking. So I started working with Yost and started milling grain, and I felt inside really good about what I was doing. I felt like I wasn't having a massive impact on the earth. The food was really nourishing, it was delicious, people were really into it. And then we started at Oak Ridge, where we started growing food on a larger scale for the restaurant. And I guess Yost in the background kept saying, hey, how would you feel about this house, you know, trying to, exactly what Matthew was just saying about connecting people to soil and to food, like where that's coming from through a dish and through a plate of food, kind of getting people to connect with the environment through food. And I was like, well, it makes complete sense because we all eat. It's something that we all have in common, and it's food, and it can be that simple. I mean, Matthew has a lot of facts. I don't have that many facts, but I really love food, and I really care about the environment. So he kept dropping these hints about, hey, let's live in this house for a year, we'll document it, let's see how much food we can grow in one particular house, and see if it will work. Can a family sustain itself from its inhabitants? And this was Future Food System. So in Federation Square, not where it was meant to be at the start, when Yo started convincing us it was out in the Dandenong Ranges, and I was cool with that. And then it got dropped in at Federation Square, and it all kind of coincided with the start of COVID. So this is probably 2018, 2019. This is the house that it's probably the 5th iteration of the greenhouse projects. So it follows the same principles: zero waste, doesn't penetrate the ground, is reverse engineered, but it's a step further. So growing all its food. And I'm going to run through some of the elements of what the house was. So there's Yost, Matt, and myself. And this was our mission statement, and something that we referred back to the whole time throughout the project. So the idea of the house was to mimic nature, but for me, I guess it was always about connecting people with food, and that's all I know. I'm not a builder. I know a little bit about sustainability, but the same as what everyone else reads about. And I was more interested in about growing food if it was going to be possible, because we didn't know, and about cooking. These are some of the, to mimic nature, it has to be closed loop. In nature, there is no waste. So every element from the house went back into mimicking the house, but it couldn't happen without inhabitants. So it's just the same as now. We help feed the environment. So we got shipped in. This was also to address some housing issues that we're having with rural housing, affordability. So they're modules. They're stainless steel modules, they're not shipping containers. So each module got shipped in, it's sitting on planks of wood, which was very scary because I remember when the build happened and these big semi-trailers were coming in. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe one big plank of wood, but they were literally just little planks of wood stacked up like Jenga. And then they got shipped in. This is also any configuration. So this was just the shape that we had, and it sat on an 87 square metre footprint. It was surrounded by solar panels. We collected our water in a stainless steel tank. We had a biodigester, so all our organic waste and compost went into the biodigester, produced methane. We cooked on the gas that it produced. And it was also kind of surrounded by foam flow, which is an invention from Geelong, which is a corrugated iron which they designed off the McDonald's apple pie container, and it can be folded. So instead of corrugated iron just meeting and there's an airlock, it's actually folded around the corner, which helps with kind of insects, but also is a fire resistant. So in a bushfire situation, usually the kind of embers and attack fire would go for the opening. So a big part of it was designed around bushfire being in Australia and with the evolving climate situation. The other component against bushfire defence was Stramit, or Durapanel, which is straw. So barley, wheat, rice, they cut down the straw and then it goes through, I've got a picture of it actually, I'll show you when we come to it, but you harvest the straw and you get put through a machine which compresses it, and as it gets compressed, it heats and releases an enzyme and gets connected together. That's what the walls were made out of. So it usually happens with acoustics in kind of buildings with music, but we used it in the house. That meant that we didn't need to put insulation in either, and that it could breathe. So all the walls were filled with biochar as well, kind of taking any toxins out of the house. The whole idea being that it was like walking through a rainforest, so there's no chemicals, no glues, no epoxies, all kind of certified. We could have got the house certified organic. We also used up a lot of waste materials. So in the centre you can see the floor. So the tiles were made out of recycled concrete, sand, and then in between the grout were copper wires, so it was actually earthed. So if you take your shoes off, you're actually connected to the earth's earthing qualities. We grew at times, 50 to 60 species of plants and animals. So this was probably our major source of protein, which were mushrooms. So in the centre, that mushroom, all the steam and fresh air was funneled off from our bathroom into the mushroom, which we're growing on waste. So straw, spent coffee, and they were inoculated. They take about 2 weeks to start to flower, and then we would grow mushrooms. So we grew 46 types of mushrooms throughout the 12 months, just due to temperature changes, which was a massive learning curve. Trying to grow oyster mushrooms in summer with a kind of plastic frontage is really difficult. And we worked with John Ford from Unearthed Mushrooms to grow. This was probably my favourite part of the house. We had aquaponics. So on your left, I think it is, the Stramit. So that's the straw Durapanel. We painted that with a lime wash and calcium wash so that they could still breathe. So there were no toxic chemicals in the house, which is really important. In the centre are our yabbies, and then on the other side are our barramundi. So we had aquaponics. So aquaponics systems are a fish tank on the bottom, and then a grow bed on the top where you grow shallow-rooted vegetables. The idea is that the fish waste gets pumped onto the grow bed. The plants in the grow bed take those nutrients, and then anything drops back down for the fish to feed. So a closed-loop system. We probably used our aquaponic systems more for the rapid growth of our vegetables. We grew a lot of watercress, which is one of the most nutrient-dense vegetables. But we did harvest fish as well. We grew trout. We had crickets. They were more for vitamin K2. So we didn't have a cow, we didn't have any sugarcane, and we weren't growing wheat. So some of the ingredients that you would automatically go to, or I would go to, in my fallback recipes, we couldn't do anymore. So beef, they eat vitamin K2, they get that from the grass. We didn't have that, so we were using crickets, and they were eating all our leafy greens. So that was a source of protein for us and nutrients. And this was the kitchen in the middle. So if you look out of Federation Square, you could look into the kitchen. And then we had two chickens, Maggie and Stephanie, and they were used for eggs. We didn't eat chickens. And then we grew a variety of grains. We had chickpeas. Our two most productive crops were buckwheat and sorghum, hence why I get to the sorghum tostada. In our first probably 3 months, we grew 40 kilos of pumpkin, about 8 kilos of green beans, and 4 kilos of chickpeas, which is really cool. And these were some of the dishes that we would produce. The idea being that we wanted to show that growing your own food is more than just a salad, that you could really push the boundaries and connect with people and show that growing your food is delicious. And I guess my biggest learning from the house was skills, and that's why the tostada comes into play. When we were at Oak Ridge, we were growing painted mountain corn and growing heaps of food. We had local dairy, we were having amazing access to produce. And I remember one day Ben Shu came for lunch, and I showed him the corn. He said, he goes, "Oh, what are you going to do with it?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to make tacos and tostadas." And he said, "Oh, and you'll nixtamalize it?" And I was like, I don't know what that means. And we started to mill it, and I tried to make what are they called? Tostadas, but the round ones are soft ones, like a soft shell taco, tortilla. And I couldn't. Again, went into a deep dive of nixtamalization and realised that history usually always has the answers. Something that we had to refer back to a lot in at Future Food System was historic methods of cookery, and I referred a lot back to the bakery, even though we didn't have wheat. but the effects of what salt might have on an ingredient, the effects that fermenting has on an ingredient, and really honing in on what one specific ingredient can do. So carrot, what happens when you ferment it or bury it in soil or add salt or submerge it into honey? Different flavour profiles. And there was probably one day in particular I remember having a meltdown because we didn't have sugar and we had lemons, and that was about it. Like, what the hell am I going to do with honey and lemons that aren't, that's exciting. And it was around the same time that we decided, because we were in the middle of Fed Square, that we would open up to the public, which was something that we had never set out to do. We decided to start doing 14-seater dinners, and people were paying, and the pressure was really on to produce. And it was our time to really show that this kind of living, this type of cooking is something that is delicious and that everybody can do. So that pressure, I guess I started to research even more, and really it clarified that I had spent the previous years, even here, just being a chef, I had been collecting a lot of skills, and finally, when I had all these restrictions, that I could put those skills to the test, and we started to produce some really cool dishes. And as I mentioned before, so buckwheat and sorghum were kind of ingredients that were really productive. The time that we were there, buckwheat floured 6 times in 1 year. I really had struggled with the bread side of things, but then we started making sausages. So it was really cool kind of seeing different ways. So when I remembered about Ben coming to us and talking about nixtamalisation, I thought maybe we could do that with sorghum. And we did, and it worked. And I still use it on my menus now at Little Picket in Geelong. So I don't know if everyone knows what sorghum is. It's the grain. GrAiNZ. So I did a bit of research about sorghum, but it's pretty hazy about where it all kind of nixtamalisation started. They say because you add pickling salt or lime wash or calcium hydroxide. I thought, how would someone back in history get their hands on calcium hydroxide like I can just Google it on the internet? But the first kind of historic events of nixtamalisation happened through boiling grain, mostly corn. So traditionally, nixtamalisation happens with corn and masa, and they boiled it in lime rocks. And over time, there was a few reasons for it. One, to make nutrients more available. So when I guess the process of nixtamalisation, but there's a few reasons. So you turn a grain into a dough to make it more pliable, makes nutrients more available to your gut, especially niacin, turns it into vitamin B3, which is really, really important if you have restricted amount of nutrients in your diet. It also, I guess, is delicious. So that flavour that you can get when you go to Mexico or you're in America and you have that, I can only describe it as Mexican flavour, comes from that process of nixtamalisation. So the calcium hydroxide turns into an alkaline solution, and it starts to break down the cell of the husk on the outer edge. As that breaks down, it makes the centre hull more absorbed. It's able to absorb. It turns those oils. It turns it into oils, and they're able to connect with protein, which is why you're able to work it as a dough. The process is very simple. There's 2 ways to do it. So I'm doing it the most simple way because you can replicate this very easily in a restaurant. There were 2 ways we were doing it at Future Food System, this way, when we started to cook for people. But originally, to make that alkaline solution, you actually boil ash. So you can create a fire of certain plants, you take the ash out of the fire, boil it in water, let it sit overnight. The water turns alkaline, everything drops to the bottom. Take that water off, cook the grain in the alkaline solution, again, let that sit overnight. Then the next day, wash the husk off. This is the process we're going to do now. You wash that outer cell off, and then you have masa. So we're going to speed that process up. So I have 250 grams of sorghum. You can? This way?
Oh, yeah, that's that one there. Thank you.
The only spoon I have is this. So 250 grams of sorghum, and then I have 750 grams of water. I'm going to pour a little bit in here, and then the rest on top of the sorghum. Take 1 teaspoon of cal, so you can get calcium hydroxide. I get it from Artisan Bottega, and that's in Melbourne, and they have a website, so you can just Google it and order it and send it to you.
Calcium hydroxide.
It's alkaline, so kind of like caustic soda on a very low level, so don't ingest it, just give you a little warning. Take 1 teaspoon, mix it into some water. This is just to help with distributing it through, otherwise it clumps a little bit. Pour it in. And then you're just cooking sorghum. So we're going to put it on like a low simmer. It takes a long time, so one I prepared earlier. It probably takes about 35 minutes, 40 minutes. And you're going to simmer it. This is the only tricky part. You kind of, if you boil it too rapidly, your grain isn't going to be cooked. If you go too slow, you don't evaporate enough water. So you're just cooking it at a moderate simmer until you can pick up a grain and you squash it between your fingers and you see one small white dot in the centre. The outer, it's all cooked, but you need that one little dot because you kind of want it a little bit undercooked just to help with the rolling of it. If you want to make like a softer, what's it called again? No, tortilla. I've just been doing tostadas, so let's forget about tortillas. If you want them to be a bit softer, I recommend soaking the grain for 1 hour before you go to cook it. The soaking just allows this cooking process to add a bit more water. You don't want to mess with this quantity because the calcium hydroxide to the water ratio is correct. But by soaking it, straining it and putting it in, the grain's just that slightly bit softer. And then you grill it and you have a nice flexible tortilla. I'm never going to get it. You boil that, then the water, like absorption method of rice, take it off, put the lid on, and that's it. Just let it sit overnight. And then the best part is when you wake up the next morning and then you open it up. It just has the best smell, and I feel like everyone should smell this. But I'll walk it around. Because this is that Mexican smell that I was talking about, and I don't know how. Yeah.
John, you can soak in the salt in cold water.
Just cold water. Yeah. What I'm going to do, I might take a little bit and then we can pass it around, and I'll keep going. I don't know if anyone knows what that smell is. Yeah. What the actual name of it is.
It smells like masa.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what the chemical actual.
I don't know what it is, but if you smell masa, that's what it's called.
Yeah, it's the best smell and the best flavour. So I'm going to take a portion of this. I'll give it a stir so you can see what underneath looks like. So you can see the white around the edges. That's because it's alkaline, so it is corrosive. Like, you just want to be a bit careful. Take the sorghum once it's at this point, and I didn't realise the sink was here, so I'm just going to show you at this point. But I do this under running water and in a sieve because you start rinsing it, and you'll see it all starts to run off. So you're going to wash it under running water and you kind of scrape it against the sieve. It really helps to get that outer layer off. It's quite a nice, I like doing this part as well. And you see this one's from Mount Zero, so Victoria. I think it's something like 33 or 40% of sorghum is grown in Africa, in Nigeria, but we do have, it's native to Australia as well, so it's a native Australian grain. A lot of it's used for animal feed and fodder. I think there's probably about 24 varieties of sorghum, but this is the best one to eat. It's also used as a cover crop. It's kind of the main reason that we had it at the house was as a cover crop. But it's also really delicious. You can pop it like popcorn. Pop it. So you want to wash it under running water continuously. And then you get to this point, where it's nice and soft. So, is it called hominy? When you hominy? Sorry. Where you just get the actual grain. So with corn, what do you use it for? Just kind of.
So like you can eat the grains like fungi, like corn, maybe a little bit of dish called topsoil, which is small. Or yeah, when you grind it, you can make pasta.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to mill this, and then you can make tamales with masa, where you flavour the masa and you steam it. Usually in banana leaves, or?
Yeah, banana or something where it's hard.
Yeah, so you can flavour that. I really like this process because in a restaurant, crunchy things are really nice. Crunchy things to start off a dish that aren't a seed cracker, yesterday's bread cracker, which we demoed last time at GrAiNZ. But I really like this as well because it's gluten-free. I take the nixtamalized sorghum, and then I'm not going to be able to show you this bit. I guess you could use a hand cranked mill, so you pop it in, mill it up, but I just use a blender. And I probably add just a small pinch of salt. I'm not sure if this does anything, and I know that it probably does. After being a baker, salt does something. But I like to think that it also seasons the cracker a little bit. And then I'm just going to blend it into a dough.
Did you try that in a water vessel at all? Like,
I haven't. Yeah, only because there was a bit of time pressure. Yeah. But I know it would work. I'd probably maybe make sure, try doing the soaking method at the start if you're going to do that, just so it's easier and a lot quicker. Depending on how you kind of want your tostada. If you want it really dense and crunchy, that's when you want to leave it a little bit undercooked in the centre. But if you want it really soft and kind of short texture, you want it to be really, really cooked. And then it starts to stick to the sides because it started to heat up. I don't know if anyone wants to kind of feel how it goes. And then it starts to stick. And it smells really nice. Washing powder. Yeah. I don't know what kind. What does it have? So if my mom can say that. I'm just going to blend it a little bit more because I would like this one to be a bit finer.
Have you played around with making like sorghum tamales or other traditional foods like that?
Not really. I'd love to put smoked fish through it and steam that, and then probably put it through, fold it in a cabbage leaf. I've been thinking about doing that, but I guess with Future Food System it became a bit of a battle between time and experimenting. Like we had, once at the start we had heaps of time, and then during lockdown we had heaps of time, and then once we kind of were serving people, not as much. I guess now with Little Picket I'd like to start doing some stuff like that. I tried nixtamalising chickpeas and it didn't work. I don't know why I thought that might work.
Have you tried other grains other than fungi? Have you tried other grains?
No, only the chickpea, but it just didn't. You could get it into a dough and then you'd roll it out and then you go to fry it like that. And it tasted like shit. I don't think there's a picture up there. So that, see the one in the, it's my bottom left-hand corner. I don't know if that's your bottom left-hand corner.
Yeah, it is.
That's a buckwheat sausage that we would make, and kind of following this similar idea of kind of using ingredients like we took linseeds, and you blend linseed with a bit of water and make a bit of a mayonnaise. And then you cook buckwheat, same as rice with an absorption method. So 500 grams of buckwheat, 750 grams of water. This is the best way to cook buckwheat. Bring it up to a simmer, and then half cover it. 15-minute timer, take it off, and perfectly cooked. And then you fold the linseed through the buckwheat, and then we would put in like some little tofu that we made and some onions and stuff, and you roll it and steam it, and it's the best sausage, like a vegan sausage. So we're actually putting that on the menu this week at Little Bigger, if you want to come. I haven't tried it with millet actually. I think that it could work. So then I just roll it. How warm is it? I find it's just because it's easy to use. So you could probably get, you could make this even. Okay. That's good. Yeah. So you could just get it a bit smoother, and then it's really easy to work with. It really depends on the kind of the texture you want. I always find the textures I want are the hardest to work with. So I like it a bit crunchy, and I like it really short, which means this is going to be really short and crunchy and tends to fall apart a little bit. But then if you want it really smooth, it tends to be a little bit denser and a little bit like firmer on your tooth. And then we roll it up. I'm lucky enough we've got a dough break at work, so we just stick it through the dough break. And then you can, your thickness is kind of, I guess, how you want it. I find about a mil and a half to 2 mils nice. Oh, can't see that. Then you can just roll it out. And then super hot oil. And then you just fry it. This one's super short. I could probably blend it for a tiny bit longer. But I'm just going to fry pieces. Can you have some? Sorry? Can you bake it? I've never tried. Can you bake it? Have you ever baked it?
I'm sure, but I think my experience is to make it super hard and like crunchy, not in a good way.
Yeah, I feel like you're taking the moisture out of it. So if anyone would like to try.
We just want to eat.
Yeah, you just grill it. Yeah, but I would recommend adding a little bit more liquid. So these ones are a bit, so they were cooked yesterday. When you take a lot of the moisture out, they last in an airtight container, and then I season. How are we going with time? Does anyone want to come and wash some, blend some, cook some, or roll some, or anything? It's GrAiNZ. Or does anyone have any questions about future food system? Or
What is the future for you in the future food system right now? What's your next project?
So Dave, my partner, and I have just opened Little Picket, a restaurant at Lawn Bowls Club in Lawn. And I guess following on from the future food system, I definitely questioned restaurants a lot, and it was a hard situation because I always wanted to be a chef. I love cooking, but I really questioned what our role is in the environment because kitchens are damaging. But we also have this potential to, I guess, rewrite the future a little bit where we're heading, and Little Picket is, I guess, the answer to that. I didn't set out to open a restaurant, but then we have. So I'm trying to be as conscious as I can to. The biggest learning I took away from that, other than the skill thing, was that we can really just affect our local communities. That is how, if everyone just started to affect the people around them, that's going to trickle on and it'll all meld together, and we can actually make some massive change. And Little Picket is just the answer to that. So we co-farm at a place called Bell's Harvest in Janjup, where we plant and grow. So on a Wednesday, a garden, and either Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning, we harvest the food for the menu. We work with other local growers like Kinsfolk in Moriac, and then other protein producers. And we just write our menu each week. And the goal of that was that we weren't rebuilding a building, we were using something existing. There was a community there that wanted to be fed and they wanted a place to hang out. I wanted to cook, so I wanted to create a job that I really wanted, which was growing food and cooking with seasonal produce. And I wanted to be a skilled cook. So things like baking or nixtamalizing or making puff pastry, cheese, charcuterie. Like, we write the menu every week, so I can do whatever I want, which is awesome. And that's what the goal with Little Picket is. And it's kind of working. Like, there's a really nice community there. We're having a really big impact with all the local growers. And it's a lot of work. It's not as easy as just ringing up and ordering food and it just shows up. We go around, pick up all the produce, we use local wine producers, but at the end of the day, I might feel a bit tired, but I feel really happy inside that I'm doing a good thing. And I think that's where the future of food is and what a chef's role is. Like we're meant to cook with seasonal produce. That's our major job. It's not the rest of the stuff that happens.
How do you educate your customers on the work that's involved in getting your produce to the table, the cost that it ends up being to them, without having to preach to them and lecture and
well, I guess it was a decision that I just wanted to feel good about what I'm doing. Yeah. So we don't probably tell people really.
Yeah. And they're happy. See, I mean, you have a name that goes with your restaurant already. So like, how can other people do that?
Well, I think food tastes better when you cook like that. So it ends up kind of speaking for itself. Like, but people in London know, like our demographic, older kind of baby boomers, and they didn't know what the future food system was. And I don't think they really cared, but I think they like that the food tastes good. And now we're getting people, like the first, I guess, 4 months, we opened the orders. I didn't buy them. Like, usually people dropping them off. So I think it's more just providing a community. Yeah. And that's where you can have the biggest impact.
Talking about education, I really loved your Happy-Go productions. They were beautiful to look at, they were obviously economic, and there wasn't a lot of storytelling behind it. Can you talk a bit about how you came up with that idea, what the process was like, and how it was received?
Yeah, so Happy-Go series was at a time where I wanted to write a cookbook, but I guess my cooking was kind of skill-based, technical cooking. But I also see food as quite an artistic thing. And I got trapped in this world of not knowing if I wanted to have an arty cookbook that was really beautiful or something really functional for people to use. And then Happy-Go, which my mum came up with the name for, was the answer to that. So the finding beauty in the process, which is again something that I learned from baking, was the time spent doing one thing, and you really have to pay attention to the air bubbles, the changes in textures. Have a go, I wanted to capture all of those processes, but I also know the feeling of when you're trying to learn a new skill and it's extremely overwhelming and you go on the internet and you don't even know where to start. So I wanted to give people a place to start where they would at least get a result, and then they could go back and they could see their part where they may have gone wrong or they wanted to find out more information about, and there would be terminology, and then they could go and look up that specifically. So I guess I just have chosen things that I like: cheese making, bread making, croissants, charcuterie, and then we have a few others that just got to get around to publishing. We've shot them all. We've done sponge cake, sausages, hot cross buns, and then where is it? Being a baker, started. I've got beautiful knives, I'm a chef, but then bakers end up using these things every day and all day, but they might be crappily made and they're $6 and no one really cares. So then we decided to have a go into tools. So we started making reclaimed wooden rolling pins, and then developed this dough knife, which I thought was going to be really simple. And I rang my friend MD Knives and I was like, let's make a dough knife. There's no Australian made ones, and then realised that forging steel at 2 mil or 1 mil thick is really difficult, and it took us a year to develop. And then the handle, I was working during lockdown, I worked at Falco about 12 months, and it was a really good refresher into what does it feel like to hold this, and the functionality of it. So then we developed the dough knife through Have a Go series. So just trying to really focus on artisan skills and the beauty of the process. So, yeah, we sell these if anyone wants one. Go to MD Knives.
Those starters are amazing. So really, I have a question about fact. So when you were in the house, you mentioned salt, which you were using, and what we need back for this. So what was the kind of
Well, so we were using grapeseed oil, but obviously you could grow grapes. So some of the components of the house we were there for 12 months, so we would get our one season, but the idea of the house would be that part of it would be covered in grape vines, and then you could take those grape seeds, or you could grow olive trees on your property and have olive oil. So anything that we could potentially grow over a long expanse of time, we were allowed to use. We put restrictions on ourselves, but we used that. So salts, we had two options: go and collect salt from the salt lakes or dry salt water. And then things like with the aquaponics system, we had to make our fish feed, which was a massive hurdle. And then you start deep diving into farmed fish and what they're being fed, and then it's even worse because it's all the wild fish going into that. So we started growing spirulina and algae for omega-3s, and then one of the best things, which is I wasn't sure what to do for this demo, but was tiger nuts, which was a tuber that we were growing. I'm sure you've heard us talk about a lot about tiger nuts. It's a little tuber that is same as a potato, but it's nut sledge, or it's a grass. So it grows everywhere here, and it's actually a weed. You can't take it into WA, but it looks the size of a hazelnut, and that was the answer to sugar. Better than honey, because honey, I love honey, but it's such a distinct flavour. Then we were taking tiger nuts. You just wash them and dry them overnight, and then you mill it, and it's like a potato. It has all the starch, like a potato flour that would come out, but it is so sweet. So if you make tiger nut milk, like you would make almond milk, you take that starchy water and you cook it, and it thickens like a custard. So we started thickening that, added a little bit of macadamia, and that was our ice cream base. We didn't have to add any sugar because the tiger nut was sweet enough. And then we would mill it into like an almond meal, and then mix it like this is the coolest thing about cooking like that, because you can take an egg and then you go, what is the best quality of an egg yolk? And it's like fat, it emulsifies. And then what is the best quality of an egg white? We can add air, you know, whip it up, it adds protein, it adds chew and stretch. Then you mix them back together with a bit of the oil and maybe a bit of honey, and then you fold in those tiger nuts, and then we produce the cake. And it was just the simplest ingredients, but utilising the best quality, which is like the coolest thing about food. And the same as, you know, is just taking the best quality of that ingredient. Yeah, the tiger nuts were a really interesting ingredient.
With the leftover water, with the calcium in it, could you use that as fertiliser or that?
It is alkaline, so you'd have to test your soil first. So
what were you using in the house? What were you using with that water?
Just wastewater. So I guess when it mixes into the stream, it's not going to be damaging, but I just question putting it on the plants, because you'll throw out the pHs, or be alright if, I mean, you had like super acidic soil and you needed to bring it down a little bit, that would work.
Just coming off the back of Matthew's talk, where it's really a focus on like nutrient density coming from the soil, could you talk a little bit about like your growing methods in the environment, and you know, how you can at the same time lower your yields? What does the future look like? Is it integration with these methods?
Yeah, it was super interesting because we had a lot of people coming through wanting to grow food, and you know, might have not enough sunlight or not enough area to actually grow. So having kind of ideas and methods for every type of living condition was really cool. We had, I think it was about 10 ingredients in our soil, and if you go to Future Food System Instagram, there's all these little highlights. You can click on one that says soil and it breaks down everything that's in it. So we started doing a few tests from the moment we started growing on nutritional density of our food. As soon as waste goes back into it, it increases in nutrients. I believe that had we kept going, we would have seen bigger spikes in that. And it's just because of nature. So we would put things like, it's just, in Matthew's book he actually talks about it, especially with cattle farming, that there's a microorganism in their manure that can sequester carbon when the soil is in balance. So it's all about balance. So we would have compost, mycelium compost, silica, magnesium, shell grit, tambar, biochar. I can't remember, it was a recipe of soil. And the food just tastes a lot better. And I think that's part of what we do at Little Picket when you grow food, compared to every now and then we'll buy stuff in, because it is really hard to grow 100% for a restaurant. And the stuff that you might get in, you know, we grew onions, so we dried all our onions and used it, and then we had to buy a same with onions, and the difference is just like, you know, almost compare it. So I think being really cautious of what goes into soil is really going to, you'll see it on the other side, just with flavour in general.
So it was only like GrAiNZ with soil that you were using, or like hydroponics?
We had the aquaponics system, but we were taking the nutrients from that. We didn't do any hydroponic growing, but that was probably a major part. The building was weighted down by the garden, so it had engineering quality as well. And I always questioned about, because I'm really interested in no-till farming, what does it mean when you plant something in a box, and then how does the mycelium grow? You know, but we were adding mycelium compost to it as well. I think there's really massive benefits to growing at home, but the key is adding compost and biochar.
Yeah. And were you using like the same rotation mentality with beds as well?
Yeah, it was continuous. So that was probably a big part of the house, was if we stopped planting, not only would we run out of food, but the problems or the input of energy became bigger. So you kind of have to constantly plant and harvest. Otherwise, you know, if you walk past the aquaponics system, for example, you notice one of the filters is getting a bit yucky, or something's not right, and you're like, I'll do it tomorrow, and then you come back and the whole thing is ruined, and then you have to spend the whole day doing it. So that I think kind of maintaining constant growing and harvesting, which is what we do with our garden now, is really the only way to kind of live a life like that. You kind of have to integrate it into everyday living. You can't just kind of go, I'll spend half a week, next week I'll do a bit more. Yeah, you just can't keep on top of the weeds and stuff like that.
Did you have an issue with pests?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we had grubs for sure at the start on cabbages, but we worked out really well. We had a chicken, but then we'd also, it sounds silly, he's never going to do this, but we did. But we would pick them and then feed them to the yabbies, so they became a food source. Yeah, which was awesome because at the start we were trying to figure that process out. Taking worms as well. But there's some natural ways to do it, like milking chili or not at the house, but we didn't have too many problems. We had one possum that used to hang around a fair bit. But because we had the chickens there, they probably became the biggest issue with digging stuff up.
I'm very curious about like a kind of day in the life when you wake up and you go to sleep, like the maintaining the system. You know, what is it like when you wake up? Do you have like a system that you go through, like checking things and using, you know, works and cooking, or what does that look like?
At the house? Yeah. I guess you're living in it, so you notice. At the start, you didn't know what you're looking for, so things were just going wrong. But then when you're in it all the time, you could hear a fan that wasn't working right, or the smells would change, and you're like, what is that? So when we first opened, we had, we're on solar power, and then we had nickel-ion batteries. So a nickel-ion battery works very similar to a car, so you have to like turn it on and use it, and if you don't, they drop their charge. And we put I was really lucky, I got to be a part of the construction of the house. So we put the battery wall in, and we were building, but we were using power from Fed Square. So the batteries were sitting there, and we turned a couple of lights on, and that's about it. And then we went to open in December and move in, and you'd get through the day, because we had the sun, and as soon as the sun would disappear, we'd have no power. So you'd go to start cooking dinner, and then everything was out. Then it started to become a real issue because the water pumps for the aquaponics stopped working, and then fish started to die. And then when they would die, you throw out the balance of the pH, and then the plants started to die. And then you're like, this is going to be a whole day, and tomorrow night's going to happen again. So we had to replace the nickel-ion batteries because we hadn't used them enough with a Australian-made lithium battery. And then probably 2 months after we did that, one day we were like, what is that smell? Like, it was disgusting. So we had a Sani pack, so any waste from the toilet would go through this machine, kind of chew it up, and then it would go into the biodigester, start to ferment, and then turn into methane, and then back into gas, onto an open flame. So I had done a lot of painting, fixing, and Matt was there, and I was like, this is your turn. Like, I'm not dealing with that smell. And a friend was down from Byron Bay doing a print of one of our fish, and we were sitting upstairs, and Matt went down and we were printing this fish, and Matt came up and he was head to toe covered in feces. And I was like, what had happened with the stop-starting of the power, the teeth that would chew everything up, had just like backed up, and then he was on FaceTime with Yost and pressed the button to release it, and it just exploded. And then there was raw sewage going down Federation Square, which isn't in the documentary. But things like that started happening. So you just notice it, and after that experience, we were on top of everything. We never let anything kind of get away from you. So it would be walk past the mushrooms, check the mushrooms, make sure the bees are still happening, what needs harvesting. And after a while, because you spend so much time in a garden, and it happens now, you kind of foresee, I'm going to pick that next week. That weed's going to get out of control, I'm going to deal with it now. You take your place in nature, really. I got to wrap up, but if there's any other questions.
Did Matt need a new phone after
Well, the funny thing was he went down and he pressed it again. Anyway, thank you. And I know I don't want to sound too preachy, but it was this whole thing and what we're doing at Little Picket Future Food System made me realise that even as an individual, you can really make a massive difference by, if you grow food and then you learn a skill of fermenting it and you start building up a pantry, you start bringing waste into your house, you start cooking really delicious food, it's really good for your body, you feel good, you start sharing that with people. You have a massive impact on your community just by doing a very simple thing, cooking. You don't even have to grow the food, you might go to a farmer's market to take it, but just cooking the seasonal food is a really powerful act. And I feel it's very exciting to be a chef now, even with all doom and gloom. But yeah, we can definitely, as cooks and bakers, and cooking at home, you can take a place in that ecosystem. Yeah.